Chapter 16 of The Measurement of Intelligence by Lewis Terman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 16. Instructions for Year X. Test 1. Vocabulary. 30 definitions, 5,400 words. Procedure and scoring as in Year VIII, Test 6. At Year X, 30 words should be correctly defined. Test 2. Detecting absurdities. Procedure. Say to the child, I am going to read a sentence which has something foolish in it, some nonsense. I want you to listen carefully and tell me what is foolish about it. Then read the sentences, rather slowly and in a matter-of-fact voice, saying after each, what is foolish about that? The sentences used are the following. A. A man said, I know a road from my house to the city which is downhill all the way to the city and downhill all the way back home. B. An engineer said that the more cars he had in his train, the faster he could go. C. Yesterday, the police found a body of a girl cut into 18 pieces. They believe that she killed herself. D. There was a railroad accident yesterday, but it was not very serious. Only 48 people were killed. E. A bicycle rider, being thrown from his bicycle in an accident, struck his head against a stone and was instantly killed. They picked him up and carried him to the hospital, and they do not think he will get well again. Each should ordinarily be answered within 30 seconds. If the child is silent, the sentence should be repeated, but no other questions or suggestions of any kind are permissible. Such questions as, could the road be downhill both ways? Or, do you think the girl could have killed herself? Would of course put the answer in the child's mouth. It is even best to avoid laughing as the sentence is read. Owing to the child's limited power of expression, it is not always easy to judge from the answer given whether the absurdity has really been detected or not. In such cases, ask him to explain himself, using some such formula as, I am not sure I know what you mean. Explain what you mean. Tell me what is foolish in the sentence I read. This usually brings a reply, the correctness or incorrectness of which is more apparent, while at the same time the formula is so general that it affords no hint as to the correct answer. Additional questions must be used with extreme caution. Scoring. Passed if the absurdity is detected in 4 out of the 5 statements. The following are samples of satisfactory and unsatisfactory answers. A. The road downhill. Satisfactory. If it was downhill to the city, it would be uphill coming back. It can't be downhill both directions. That could not be. That is foolish. Explain. Because it must be uphill one way or the other. That would be a funny road. Explain. No road can be like that. It can't be downhill both ways. Unsatisfactory. Perhaps he took a little different road coming back. I guess it is a very crooked road. Coming back he goes around the hill. The man lives down in a valley. The road was made that way so it would be easy. Just a road. I don't see anything foolish. He should say, a road which goes. B. What the engineer said. Satisfactory. If he has more cars he will go slower. It is the other way. If he wants to go faster, he mustn't have so many cars. The man didn't mean what he said, or else it would slip at the tongue. That's the way it would be if he was going downhill. Foolish, because the cars don't help pull the train. He ought to say, slower, not faster. Unsatisfactory. A long train is nicer. The engine pulls harder if the train has lots of cars. That's all right. I suppose he likes a big train. Nothing foolish. When I went to the city, I saw a train that had lots of cars, and it was going awfully fast. He should have said, the faster I can run. C. The girl who was thought to have killed herself. Satisfactory. She could not have cut herself into 18 pieces. She would have been dead before that. She might have cut 2 or 3 pieces off, but she couldn't have do the rest. Laughing. Well, she may have killed herself, but if she did it, it's a sure thing that someone else came along after and chopped her up. That policeman must have been a fool. Explain. To think that she could chop herself into 18 pieces. Unsatisfactory. Think that she killed herself? They know she did. They can't be sure. Someone may have killed her. It was a foolish girl to kill herself. How can they tell who killed her? No girl would kill herself unless she was crazy. It ought to read, they think that she committed suicide. D. The railroad accident. Satisfactory. That was very serious. I should like to know what you would call a serious accident. You would say it was not serious if 2 or 3 people were killed, but 48, that is serious. Unsatisfactory. It was a foolish mistake that made the accident. They couldn't help it. It wasn't an accident. It might have been worse. Nothing foolish. It's just sad. C. The bicycle rider. Satisfactory. How could he get well after he was already killed? Why, he's already dead. No use to take a dead man to the hospital. They ought to have taken him to a graveyard. Unsatisfactory. Foolish to fall off a bicycle. He should have known how to ride. They ought to have carried him home. Why? So his folks could get a doctor. He should have been more careful. Maybe they can cure him if he isn't hurt very bad. There's nothing foolish in that.
Remarks. The detection of absurdities is one of the most ingenious and serviceable tests of the entire scale. It is little influenced by schooling, and it comes nearer than any other to being a test of that species of mother-wit which we call common sense.
Like the comprehension questions, it may be called a test of judgment, using this term in the colloquial and not in the logical sense. The stupid person, whether depicted in literature, proverb, or the ephemeral joke column, is always, and justly, it would seem, characterized by a huge tolerance for absurd contradictions and by a blunt sensitivity for the fine points of a joke. Intellectual discrimination and judgment are inferior. The ideas do not cross-light each other, but remain relatively isolated. Hence, the most absurd contradictions are swallowed, so to speak, without arousing the protest of the critical faculty. The latter, indeed, is only a name for the tendency of intellectually irreconcilable elements to clash. If there is no clash, if the elements remain apart, it goes without saying that there will be no power of criticism.
The critical faculty begins its development in the early years and strengthens pari passu with the growing wealth of interassociations among ideas. But in the average child, it is not until the age of about 10 years that it becomes equal to tasks like those presented in this test. 8-year intelligence hardly ever scores more than 2 or 3 correct answers out of 5. By 12, the critical ability has so far developed that the test is nearly always passed. It is an invaluable test for the higher grades of mental deficiency. As a test of the critical powers, Binford first used trap questions, as for example, is snow red or black? The results were disappointing, for it was found that owing to timidity, deference, and suggestibility, normal children often failed on such questions. Deference is more marked in normal than in feeble-minded children, and it is because of the influence of this trait that it is necessary always to forewarn the subject that the sentence to be given contains nonsense. Binet located the test in Year XI of the 1908 scale, but changed it to Year X in 1911.
Goddard and Coleman retained it in Year XI. The large majority of the statistics, including those of Goddard and Coleman, warrant the location of the test in Year X. Not all have used the same absurdities, and these have not been worded uniformly. Most have required 3 successes out of 5, but Bobertag and Coleman require 3 out of 4. Bobertag's procedure is also different in that he does not forewarn the child that an absurdity is to follow. The present form of the test is the result of 3 successive refinements. It will be noted that we have made 2 substitutions in Binet's list of absurdities. Those omitted from the original scale are, I have 3 brothers, Paul, Ernest, and myself. And, if I were going to commit suicide, I would not choose Friday because Friday is an unlucky day and would bring me misfortune. The last has a puzzling feature which makes it too hard for Year X, and the other is objectionable with children who are accustomed to hear a foreign language in which the form of expression used in an absurdity is idiomatically correct. The 2 we have substituted for these objectionable absurdities are the road downhill and what the engineer said. The 5 we have used, though of nearly equal difficulty, are here listed in the order from easiest to hardest. Our series as a whole is slightly easier than Binet's. Test 3. Drawing designs from memory. Procedure. Use the designs shown on the accompanying printed form. If copies are used, they must be exact in size and shape. Before showing the card, say, this card has 2 drawings on it. I'm going to show them to you for 10 seconds, then I will take the card away and let you draw from memory what you have seen. Examine both drawings carefully and remember that you only have 10 seconds. Provide pencil and paper and then show the card for 10 seconds, holding it at right angles to the child's line of vision and with the designs in the position given in the plate. Have the child draw the designs immediately after they are removed from sight. Scoring. The test is passed if one of the designs is reproduced correctly and the other about half correctly. Correctly means that the essential plan of the design has been grasped and reproduced. Ordinary irregularities due to lack of motor skill or to hasty execution are disregarded. Half correctly means that some essential part of the design has been omitted or misplaced, or that parts have been added. The sample reproductions shown on the scoring card will serve as a guide. It will be noted that an inverted design, or one whose right and left sides have been transposed, is counted only half correct, however perfect it may be in the other respects. Also that design B is counted only half correct if the inner rectangle is not located off-center. Remarks. Binet states that the main factors involved in success are attention, visual memory, and a little analysis. The power of rapid analysis would seem to be the most important, for if the designs are analyzed, they may be reproduced from a verbal memory of the analysis. Without some analysis, it would hardly be possible to remember the designs at all, as one of them contains 13 lines and the other 12. The memory span for unrelated objects is far too limited to permit us to grasp and retain that number of unrelated impressions. Success is possible only by grouping the lines according to their relationships, so that several of them are given in unitary value and remembered as one. In this manner, the design to the right, which is composed of 12 lines, may be reduced to 4 elements. 1. The outer rectangle. 2. The inner rectangle. 3. The off-center position of the inner rectangle. And 4. The joining of the angles. Of course, the child does not ordinarily make an analysis as explicit as this, but analysis of some kind, even though it be unconscious, is necessary to success. Ability to pass the test indicates the presence, in a certain definite amount, of the tendency for the contents of consciousness to fuse into a meaningful whole. Failure indicates that the elements have maintained their unitary character or have fused inadequately. It is seen, therefore, that the test has a close kinship with the test of memory for sentences. The latter also permits the fusion or grouping of impressions according to meaning, and the result that 5 or 6 times as many meaningful syllables as nonsense syllables or digits can be retained. Binet had many more failures on design A than on design B. This is probably due to the fact that he showed the designs without B to the left. A majority of subjects, probably because of the influence of reading habits, examine the first figure to the left, and because of the short time allowed for the inspection, are unable to devote much time to the design at the right. We have placed the design of greater intrinsic difficulty at the left, with the result that the failures are almost equally divided between the two. Binet used this test in his unstandardized series of 1905, omitted it in 1908, but included it in the 1911 revision, locating it in Year X. Except for Goddard, who recommends Year XI, there is rather general agreement that the test belongs at Year X. Our own data show that it may be placed either at Year X or Year XI, according as the grading is rigid or lenient.
Test 4. Reading for 8 memories. Material. We use Binet's selection slightly adapted as follows. New York, September 5th. A fire last night burned 3 houses near the center of the city. It took some time to put it out. The loss was $50,000 and 17 families lost their homes. In saving a girl who was asleep in bed, a fireman was burned on the hands.
The copy of the selection used by the subject should be printed in heavy type and should not contain the bars dividing it into memories. The Stanford record booklet contains the selection in 2 forms, one suitable for use in scoring, the other in heavy type to be read by the subject. Procedure. Hand the selection to the subject, who should be seated comfortably in a good light, and say, "I want you to read this for me as nicely as you can." The subject must be read aloud. Pronounce all the words which the subject is unable to make out, not allowing more than 5 seconds hesitation in such a case. Record all errors made in reading the selection and the exact time. By error is meant the omission, substitution, transposition, or mispronunciation of one word. The subject is not warned in advance that he will be asked to report what he has read, but as soon as he has finished reading, put the selection out of sight and say, "Very well done. Now I want you to tell me what you read. Begin at the first and tell me everything you can remember." After the subject has repeated everything he can recall and has stopped, say, "And what else? Can you remember any more of it?" Give no other aid of any kind. It is of course not permissible, when the child stops, to prompt him with such questions as, "And what next? Where were the houses burned? What happened to the fireman?" etc. The report must be spontaneous. Now and then, though not often, a subject hesitates or even refuses to try, saying he is unable to do it. Perhaps he has misunderstood the request and he thinks he is expected to repeat the selection word for word, as in the tests of memory for sentences. We urge a little and repeat, "Tell me in your own words all you can remember of it." Others misunderstand in a different way, and thinking they are expected to tell merely what the story is about, they say, "It was about some houses that burned." In such cases, we repeat the instructions with special emphasis on the words "all you can remember." Scoring. The test is passed if the selection is read in 35 seconds with not more than 2 errors, and if the report contains at least 8 memories. By underscoring the memories correctly reproduced, and by interlineations to show serious departures from the text, the record can be made complete with a minimum of trouble. The main difficulty in scoring is to decide whether a memory has been reproduced correctly enough to be counted. Absolutely literal reproduction is not expected. The rule is to count all memories whose thought is reproduced with only a minor change in the wording. It took quite a while instead of it took some time is satisfactory. Likewise, got burnt for was burned, who was sleeping for who was asleep, are homeless for lost their homes, in the middle for near the center, big fire for a fire, etc. Memories as badly mutilated as the following, however, are not counted. A lot of buildings for 3 houses, a man for a fireman, who was sick for who was asleep, etc. Occasionally we may give half credit, as in the case of was $17,000 for was $50,000, and 15 families for and 17 families, etc. Remarks. Are we warranted in using at all as a measure of intelligence a test which depends as much on instruction as this one does? Many are inclined to answer this question in the negative. The test has been omitted from the revisions of Goddard, Coleman, and Binet himself. As regards Binet's earlier test of reading for 2 memories, in Year VIII there could hardly be any difference of opinion. The ability to read at that age depends so much on the accident of environment that the test is meaningless unless we know all about the conditions which have surrounded the child. The use of the test in Year X, however, is a very different matter. There are comparatively few children of that age who will fail to pass it for lack of the requisite school instruction. Children of 10 years who have attended school with reasonable regularity for 3 years are practically always able to read the selection in 35 seconds and without over 2 mistakes unless they are retarded almost to the borderline of mental deficiency. Of our 10-year-olds who failed to meet the test, only a fourth did so because of inability to meet the reading requirements as regards time or mistakes. The remaining failures were caused by inadequate report, and most of these subjects were of the distinctly retarded group. We may conclude, therefore, that given anything approaching normal educational advantages, the test is really a measure of intelligence. Used with due caution, it is perhaps as valuable as any other test in the scale. It is only necessary, in case of failure, to ascertain the facts regarding the child's educational opportunities. Even this precaution is superfluous in case the subject tests as low as 8 years by the remainder of the scale. A safe rule is to omit the test from the calculation of mental age if the subject has not attended school the equivalent of 2 or 3 years. It has been contended by some that tests in which success depends upon language mastery cannot be real tests of intelligence. By such critics, language tests have been set over against intelligence tests as contrasting opposites. It is easy to show, however, that this view is superficial and psychologically unsound. Everyone who has an acquaintance with the facts of mental growth knows that language mastery of some degree is a sine qua non of conceptual thinking. Language growth, in fact, mirrors the entire mental development. There are few more reliable indications of a subject's stage of intellectual maturity than his mastery of language. The rate of reading, for example, is a measure of the rate of association. Letters become associated together in certain combinations making words. Words into word groups and sentences. Recognition is for the most part an associative process. Rapid and accurate association will mean ready recognition of the printed form. Since language units, whether letters, words, or word groups, have more or less preferred associations according to their habitual arrangement into larger units, it comes about that in the normal mind, under normal conditions, these preferred sequences arouse the apperceptive complex necessary to make a running recognition rapid and easy. It is reasonable to suppose that in the subnormal mind the habitual common associations are less firmly fixed, thus diminishing the effectiveness of the ever-changing apperceptive expectancy. Reading is, therefore, largely dependent on what James calls the fringe of consciousness and the consciousness of meaning. In reading connected matter, every unit is big with a mass of tendencies. The smaller and more isolated the unit, the greater is the number of possibilities. Every added unit acts as a modifier, limiting the number of tendencies until we have finally, in case of a large mental unit, a fairly manageable whole. When the most logical and suitable of these associations arise easily from subconsciousness to consciousness, recognition is made easy, and their doing so will depend on whether the habitual relations of the elements have left permanent traces in the mind. The reading of the subnormal subject bears a close analogy to the reading of nonsense matter by the normal person. It has been ascertained by experiment that such reading requires about twice as much time as the reading of connected matter. This is true for the reason that of thousands of associations possible with each word, no particular association is favored. Their perceptive expectancy, practically nil in the reading of nonsense material, must be decidedly deficient in all poor reading. Furthermore, in the case of the ordinary reader, there is a feeling of rightness or wrongness about the thought sequences. That less intelligent subjects have this sense of fitness to a much less degree is evident by their passing over words so mutilated in pronunciation as to deprive them of all meaning. The transposition of letters and words, and the failure to observe marks of punctuation, points to the same thing. In other words, all the reading of stupid subject is with material which to him is more or less nonsensical. A little observation will convince one that mentally retarded subjects, even when they possess a reasonable degree of fluency in recognizing printed words, do not sense shades of meaning. Their reading is by small units. Words and phrases do not fuse into one mental content, but remain relatively unconnected. The expression is monotonous, and the voice is more of their unnatural schoolroom pitch. They read more slowly, more often misplace the emphasis, and miscall more words. In short, one who has psychological insight and is acquainted with reading standards can easily detect the symptoms of intellectual inferiority by hearing a dull subject read a brief selection. The giving of memories is also significant. Feeble-minded adults who have been well schooled are sometimes able to call the words of the text fairly fluently, but are usually unable to give more than a scanty report of what has been read. The scope of attention has been exhausted in the mere recognition and pronunciation of words. In general, the greater the mechanical difficulties which a subject encounters, the less adequate is his report of memories. The test has, however, one real fault. School children have a certain advantage in it over older persons of the same mental age whose school experience is less recent. Adult subjects tend to give their report in less literal form. It is necessary, therefore, to give credit for the reproduction of the ideas of the passage rather than for strictly literal memories.
The selection we have used is, with minor changes, the same as Bennett's.
His selection was divided into 19 memories. One here given has 21 memories. Binet used the test both in Year 8 and Year 9, requiring 2 memories at Year 8 and 6 memories at Year 9. When we require 8 memories, as we have done, the test becomes difficult enough for non-selected school children of 10 years. Location in Year 10 seems preferable because it ensures that the child will almost certainly have had the schooling requisites for learning to read a selection of this difficulty, even if he has started to school at a later age than is customary. Naturally, placing the test higher in the scale makes it more a test of report and less a test of ability to recognize and pronounce printed words. Test 5. Comprehension, 4th degree. The questions for this year are: A. What ought you to say when someone asks your opinion about a person you don't know very well? B. What ought you to do before beginning something very important? C. Why should we judge a person more by his actions than by his words? The procedure is the same as for the previous comprehension tests. Each question may be repeated, but its form must not be changed. It is not permissible to make any explanation whatever as to the meaning of the question, except to substitute beginning for undertaking when B seems not to be comprehended. Scoring. 2 out of the 3 questions must be answered satisfactorily. Study of the following classified responses should make scoring very easy in most cases. A. When someone asks your opinion. Satisfactory. I would say I don't know him very well. 42% of correct answers. Tell him what I know and no more. 34% of correct answers. I would say that I'd rather not express any opinion about him. 20% of the correct answers. Tell him to ask someone else. I would not express any opinion. Unsatisfactory. Unsatisfactory responses are due either to failure to grasp the importance of the question or to inability to suggest the appropriate action demanded by the situation. The latter form of failure is the more common, e.g., I would say they are nice. Say you like them. Say what I think. Say it's none of their business. Tell them I mind my own business. Say I would get acquainted with them. Say that I don't talk about people. Say I didn't know how he looked. Tell them you ought not to say such things, you might get into trouble. I wouldn't say anything. I would try to answer, say I did not know his name, etc. The following are samples of failure due to mistaking the import of the question. I'll say, how do you do? Say, I'm glad to meet you. B. Before undertaking something important. Satisfactory responses fall into the following classes. 1. Brief statement of preliminary consideration as, think about it, look it over, plan it all out, make your plans, stop and think, etc. 2. Special emphasis on preliminary preparation and correct procedure as find out the best way to do it, find out what it is, get everything ready, do every little thing that would help you, get all the details you can, take your time and figure it out, etc. 3. Asking help as ask someone to help you who knows all about it, pray if you are a Christian, ask advice, etc. 4. Preliminary testing of ability, self-analysis, etc. as try something easier first, practice and make sure I could do it, learn how to do it, etc.
5. Consider the wisdom or propriety of doing it. Think whether it would be best to do it. See whether it would be possible.
About 65% of the correct responses belong either to Group 1 or 2, about 20% to Group 3, and most of the remainder in Group 4. Unsatisfactory responses are of the following types. 1. Due to mistaking the import of the question, e.g., ask for it, or to say please, ask whose it is. Replies of this kind can be nearly all eliminated by repeating the question using beginning instead of undertaking. 2. Replies more or less absurd or irrelevant as promise to do your best, wash your face and hands, get a lot of insurance, dress up and take a walk, tell your name, know whether it's correct, begin at the beginning, say you will do it, see if it's a fake, go to school a long time, pass an examination, do what is right, add up and see how much it would cost, say I would do it, just start doing it, go away, consult a doctor, see if you have time, etc. C. Why we should judge a person more by his actions than by his words. Satisfactory responses fall into the following classes. 1. Words and deeds both mentioned and contrasted in reliability, as actions speak louder than words. This in 8% of successes. You can tell more by his actions than by his words. He might talk nice and do bad things. Sometimes people say things and don't do them. It's not what you say, but why you do that counts. Talk is cheap. When he does a thing, you can believe it. People don't do everything they say. A man might steal, but talk like a nice man. Over 45% of all correct responses belong to Group 1. 2. Acts stressed without mention of words as, you can tell by his actions whether he is good or not. If he acts nice, he is nice. Actions show for themselves. Group 2 contains about 25% of the correct responses.
3. Emphasis on unreliability of words as, you can't tell by his words he might lie or boast, because you can't always believe what people say. Group 3 contains 15% of the correct responses.
4. Responses which state that a man's deeds are sometimes better than his words, as, he might talk ugly and still not do bad things. Some really kind-hearted people scold and swear. A man's words may be worse than his deeds, etc. Group 4 contains over 10% of the correct responses. Unsatisfactory responses are usually due to inability to comprehend the meaning of the question. If there is complete lack of comprehension, the result is either silence or a totally irrelevant response. If there is partial comprehension of the question, the response may be partially relevant, but fail to make the expected distinction. The following are simple failures. You could tell by his words that he was educated. It shows he is polite if he acts nice. Sometimes people aren't polite. Actions show who he might be. Acts may be foolish. Words ain't right. A man might be dumb. A fellow don't know what he says. Some people can talk, but don't have control of themselves. You can tell by his acts whether he goes with bad people. If he doesn't act right, you know he won't talk right. Actions show if he has manners. Might get embarrassed and not talk good. He may not know how to express his thoughts. He might be a rich man but a poor talker. He might say the wrong thing, afterwards be sorry for it, etc. The last 4 are nearer correct than the others, but they fall just short of expressing the essential contrast. Remarks. For discussion of the comprehension questions as a test of intelligence, see page 158. Binet used 8 questions, 3 easy and 5 difficult, and required that 5 out of 8 be answered correctly in Year 10. The 8 were as follows. 1. What do you do when you have missed your train? 2. When you have been struck by a playmate, etc. 3. When you have broken something, etc. 4. When about to be late for school. 5. When about to undertake something important. 6. Why excuse a bad act committed in anger more readily than a bad act committed without anger? 7. What to do if someone asks your opinion, etc. 8. Why can you judge a person better by his actions, etc. As we have shown, questions 1, 2, 3, and 4 are much too easy for Year 10. Question 6 is hard enough for Year 12. We have omitted it because it was not needed and is not entirely satisfactory. Test 6. Naming 60 words. Procedure. Say, now I want to see how many different words you can name in 3 minutes. When I say ready, you must begin and name the words as fast as you can, and I will count them. Do you understand? Be sure to do your very best, and remember that just any words will do, like clouds, dog, chair, happy. Ready? Go ahead. The instructions may be repeated if the subject does not understand what is wanted. As a rule, the task is comprehended instantly and entered into with great zest. Do not stare at the child, and do not say anything as the test proceeds unless there is a pause of 15 seconds. In this event, say, go ahead as fast as you can. Any words will do. Repeat this urging after every pause of 15 seconds. Some subjects, usually rather intelligent ones, hit upon the device of counting or putting words together in sentences. We then break in with counting or sentences as the case may be not allowed. You must name separate words. Go ahead. Record the individual words if possible and mark the end of each half minute. If the words are named so rapidly that they cannot be taken down, it is easy to keep the count by making a pencil stroke for each word. If the latter method is employed, repeated words may be indicated by making a cross instead of a single stroke. Always make record of repetitions. Scoring. The test is passed if 60 words, exclusive of repetitions, are named in 3 minutes. It is not allowable to accept 20 words in 1 minute or 40 words in 2 minutes as an equivalent of the expected score. Only real words are counted. Remarks. Scoring, as we have seen, takes account only of the number of words. It is instructive, however, to note the kind of words given. Some subjects, more often those of the 8 or 9 year intelligence level, give mainly isolated, detached words. As well stated by Binet, little children exhaust an idea in naming it. They say, for example, hat, and then pass on to another word without noticing that hats differ in color, in form, their various parts, different uses and accessories, and that enumerating all these they could find a large number of words. Others quickly take advantage of such relationships and name many parts of an object before leaving it, or name a number of other objects belonging to the same class. Hat, for example, suggests cap, hood, coat, shirt, shoes, stockings, etc. Pencil suggests book, slate, paper, desk, ink, map, schoolyard, teacher, etc. Responses of this type may be made up of 10 or a dozen plainly distinct word groups. Another type of response consists in naming only objects present, or words which present objects immediately suggest. It is unfortunate that this occurs, since rooms in which testing is done vary so much with respect to furnishings. The subject who chooses this method is obviously handicapped if the room is relatively bare. One way to avoid this influence is to have all subjects name the words with eyes closed, but the distraction thus caused is sometimes rather disturbing. It is perhaps best for the present to adhere to the original procedure and to follow the rule of making tests in a room containing few furnishings in addition to the necessary table and chairs. A fourth type of response is that including a large proportion of unusual or abstract words. This is the best of all and is hardly ever found except with subjects who are above the 11-year intelligence level. It goes without saying that a response need not belong entirely to any one of the above types. Most responses, in fact, are characterized by a mixture of 2 or 3 of the types, one of them perhaps being dominant. Though not without its shortcomings, the test is interesting and valuable. Success in it does not, as one might suppose, depend solely upon the size of the vocabulary. Even 8-year-olds ordinarily know the meaning of more than 3,000 words, and by 10 years the vocabulary usually exceeds 5,000 words, or 80 times as many as the child is expected to name in 3 minutes. The main factors in success are 2. 1. Richness and variety of previously made associations with common words, and 2. The readiness of these associations to reinstate themselves. The young or the retarded subject fishes in the ocean of his vocabulary with a single hook, so to speak. He brings up each time only one word. The subject endowed with superior intelligence employs a net, the idea of a class, for example, and brings up half a dozen words or more. The latter accomplishes a greater amount and with less effort, but it requires intelligence and willpower to avoid wasting time with detached words. One is again and again astonished at the poverty of associations which this test discloses with retarded subjects. For 20 or 30 seconds, such children may be unable to think of a single word. It would be interesting if at such periods we could get a glimpse into the subject's consciousness. There must be some kind of mental content, but it seems too vague to be crystallized in words. The ready association of thoughts with definite words connotes a relatively high degree of intellectual advancement. Language forms are the shorthand of thought. Without facile command of language, thinking is vague, clumsy, and ineffective. Conversely, vague mental content entails language shortage. Occasionally, a child of 11 or 12-year intelligence will make a poor showing in this test. When this happens, it is usually due either to excessive embarrassment or to a strange persistence in running down all the words of a given class before launching out upon a new series. Occasionally, too, an intelligent subject wastes time in thinking up a beautiful list of big or unusual words. As stated by Bobertag, success is favored by a certain amount of intellectual nonchalance, a willingness to ignore sense, and a readiness to break away from a train of associations as soon as the point of diminishing returns has been reached. This doubtless explains why adults sometimes make such a surprisingly poor showing in the test. They have less intellectual nonchalance than children, are less willing to subordinate such considerations as completeness and logical connection to the demands of speed. Nolan's unemployed men of 12 to 13-year intelligence succeeded no better than school children of the 10-year level. We do not believe, however, that this fault is serious enough to warrant the elimination of the test. The fact is that in a large majority of cases, the score which it yields agrees fairly closely with the results of the scale as a whole. Subjects more than a year or two below the mental age of 10 years seldom succeed. Those more than a year or two above the 10-year level seldom fail. There is another reason why the test should be retained. It often has significance beyond that which appears in the mere number of words given. The naming of unusual and abstract words is an instance of this. An unusually large number of repetitions has symptomatic significance in the other direction. It indicates a tendency to mental stereotypy, so frequently encountered in testing the feeble-minded. The proportion of repetitions made by normal children of the 10 or 11-year intelligence level rarely exceeds 2 or 3% of the total number of words named. Those of older retarded children of the same level occasionally reach 6 or 8%. It is conceivable, of course, that a more satisfactory test of this general nature could be devised, such, for example, as having the subject name all the words he can of a given class: four-footed animals, things to eat, articles of household furniture, trees, birds, etc. The main objection to this form of the test is that the performance would, in all probability, be more influenced by environment and formal instruction than in the case with the test of naming 60 words. One other matter remains to be mentioned, namely the relative number of words named in the half-minute periods. As would be expected, the rate of naming words decreases as the test proceeds. In the case of the 10-year-olds, we find the average number of words for the 6 successive half-minutes to be as follows: 18, 12.5, 10.5, 9, 8.5, 7. Some subjects maintain an almost constant rate throughout the test. Others rapidly exhaust themselves, while a very few make a bad beginning and improve as they go. As a rule, it is only the very intelligent who improve after the first half-minute. On the other hand, mentally retarded subjects and very young normals exhaust themselves so quickly that only a few words are named in the last minute. Binet first located this test in Year XI, but shifted it to Year XII in 1911. Goddard and Coleman retained it in Year XI, though Goddard's statistics suggest Year X as the proper location, and Coleman's even suggest Year IX. Coleman, however, accepts 50 words as satisfactory in case the response contains a considerable proportion of abstract or unusual words. All the American statistics except Rose agree in showing that the test is easy enough for Year X. Alternative Test 1. Repeating 6 digits. The digit series used are 3, 7, 4, 8, 5, 9 and 5, 2, 1, 7, 4, 6. The procedure and scoring are the same as in Year VII, Test 3, except that only 2 trials are given, one of which must be correct. The test is somewhat too easy for Year X when 3 trials are given. The test of repeating 6 digits did not appear in the Binet scale and seems not to have been standardized until inserted in the Stanford series. Alternative Test 2, repeating 20 to 22 syllables. The sentences for this year are: A. The apple tree makes a cool, pleasant shade on the ground where the children are playing. B. It is nearly 1:30. The house is very quiet and the cat has gone to sleep. C. In summer, the days are very warm and fine. In winter, it snows and I am cold. Procedure and scoring exactly as in Year VI, Test 6. Remarks. It is interesting to note that 5 years of mental growth are required to pass from the ability to repeat 16 or 18 syllables, Year VI, to the ability to repeat 20 to 22 syllables. Similarly, in memory for digits, 5 digits are almost as easy at Year VII as 6 at Year X. Two explanations are available. 1. The increased difficulty may be accounted for by a relatively slow growth of memory power after the age of 6 or 7 years. Or 2. The increase in difficulty may be real, expressed an inner law as to the behavior of the memory span in dealing with material of increasing length. Both factors are probably involved. This is another of Stanford additions to the scale. Average children of 10 years ordinarily pass it, but older, retarded children of 10-year mental age make a poorer showing. In the case of mentally retarded adults especially, the verbal memory is less exact than that of school children of the same mental age. Alternative Test 3. Constructing a puzzle. Healy and Fernald. Material. Use the form board pictures on page 279. This may be purchased of C.H. Sterling & Co., Chicago, Illinois. A homemade one will do as well if care is taken to get the dimensions exact. 1/4 inch wood should be used. The inside of the frame should be 3 by 4 inches and the dimensions of the blocks should be as follows. 1 inch and 3 1/16 by 3, 1 by 1 1/2, 1 by 2 3/4, 1 by 1 1/2, 1 1/4 by 2. Procedure. Place the frame on the table before the subject, the short side nearest him. The blocks are placed in an irregular position on the side of the frame away from the subject. Take care that the board with the blocks in the place is not exposed to view in advance of the experiment. Say, I want you to put these blocks in this frame so that all the space will be filled up. If you do it rightly, they will all fit in and there will be no space left over. Go ahead. Do not tell the subject to see how quickly he can do it. Say nothing that would even suggest hurrying, for this tends to call forth the trial and error procedure, even with intelligent subjects. Scoring. The test is passed if the child succeeds in fitting the blocks into place 3 times in a total of 5 minutes for the 3 trials. The method of procedure is fully as important as the time, but is not so easily scored in quantitative terms. Nevertheless, the examiner should always take observations on the method employed, noting especially any tendency to make and to repeat moves which lead to obvious impossibilities, i.e., moves which leave a space obviously unfitted to any of the remaining pieces. Some subjects repeat an absurd move many times over. Others make an absurd move but promptly correct it. Others, and these are usually the bright ones, look far enough ahead to avoid error altogether. Remarks. This test was devised by Professor Freeman, was adapted slightly by Healy and Fernald, and was first standardized by Dr. Coleman. Miss Gertrude Hall has also standardized it, but on a different procedure from that described above. The test has a lower correlation with intelligence than most of the other tests of the scale. Many bright children of 10-year intelligence adopt the trial and error method and have little success, while retarded older children of only 8-year intelligence sometimes succeed. Age, apart from intelligence, seems to play an important part in determining the nature of the performance. A favorable feature of the test, however, is the fact that it makes no demand on language ability, and that it brings into play an aspect of intelligence which is relatively neglected by the remainder of the scale. For this reason, it is at least worth keeping as an alternative test. End of Chapter 16 of The Measurement of Intelligence. Read by Leon Harvey. Chapter 17 of The Measurement of Intelligence by Lewis Terman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 17. Instructions for Year XII. Test 1. Vocabulary, 40 definitions, 7,200 words. Procedure and scoring. As in previous vocabulary tests, in this case 40 words must be defined. Test 2. Defining abstract words. Procedure. The words to be defined are pity, revenge, charity, envy, and justice. The formula is, what is pity? What do you mean by pity? And so on with the other words. If the meaning of the response is not clear, ask the subject to explain what he means. If the definition is in terms of the word itself, as pity means to pity someone, revenge is to take revenge, etc., it is then necessary to say, yes, but what does it mean to pity someone? Or, what does it mean to take revenge, etc.? Only supplementary questions of this kind are permissible. Scoring. The test is passed if 3 of the 5 words are satisfactorily defined. The definition need not be strictly logical nor the language elegant. It is sufficient if the definition shows that the meaning of the word is known. Definitions which define by means of an illustration are acceptable. The following are samples of satisfactory and unsatisfactory responses.
A. Pity. Satisfactory. To be sorry for someone. To feel compassion. To have sympathy for a person. To feel bad for someone. It means you help a person out and don't like to have him suffer. To have a feeling for people when they are treated wrong. If anybody gets hurt real bad, you pity them. It's when you feel sorry for a tramp and give him something to eat. If someone is in trouble and you know how it feels to be in that condition, you pity him. You see something that's wrong and have your feeling aroused. Of 180 correct responses, 85 or 65% defined pity as to feel sorry for someone, or words to that effect. Less than 10% defined by means of illustration. Unsatisfactory. To think of the poor. To be good to others. To help. It means sorrow, mercy. To cheer people up. It means what a pity. To be ashamed. To be sick or poor. It's when you break something. Apart from inability to reply, which accounts for nearly 1/4 of the failures, there is no predominant type of unsatisfactory response.
B. Revenge. Satisfactory. To get even with someone. To get back on him. To do something to the one who has done something to you. To hurt them back. To pay it back. Or do something back. To do something mean in return. To square up with a person. When somebody slaps you, you slap back. You kill a person if he does something to you. The expression to get even was found in 42% of 120 correct answers. To pay it back, or to do something back, in 20%. To get back on him in 17%. About 8% were illustrations. Unsatisfactory. To be mad. You try to hurt them. To fight. To hate a person. To kill them. It means hateful. To try again. To think evil of someone. To hate someone who has done you wrong. To let a person off. To go away from something. Inability to reply accounts for a little over 40% of the failures. C. Charity. Satisfactory. To give to the poor. To help those who are needy. It is charity if you are poor and somebody helps you. To give to somebody without pay. Of 110 correct replies, 72% were worded substantially like the first or second given above.
Unsatisfactory. A person who helps the poor. A place where poor people get food and things. It is a good life. To be happy. To be poor. Charity is being treated good. To be charitable. Charity is selling something that is not worth much. It means to be good or to be kind.
When the last named response is given, we should say, explain what you mean. If this brings an amplification of the response to, it means to do things for the poor, or the equivalent, the score is plus. Charity means love is also minus if the statement cannot be further explained and is merely rote memory of the passage in the 13th chapter of the 1 Corinthians. Simply to help or to give is unsatisfactory. Half of the failures are due to inability to reply.
D. Envy. Satisfactory. You envy someone who has something you want. It's the way you feel when you see someone with something nicer than you have. It's when a poor girl sees a rich girl with nice dresses and things. You hate someone because they've got something you want. Jealousy. Satisfactory if subject can explain what jealousy means, otherwise it is minus. It's when you see a person better off than you are.
Nearly 3/4 of the correct responses say in substance, you envy a person who has something you want. Most of the others are concrete illustrations. Unsatisfactory. To hate someone, or simply to hate, you don't like them. Bad feeling towards anyone. To be a great man or woman. Not to be nice to people. What we do to our enemies. Inability to respond accounts for 55% of the failures. E. Justice. Satisfactory. To give people what they deserve. It means that everybody is treated the same way, whether he is rich or poor. It's what you get when you go to court. If one does something and gets punished, that's justice. To do the square thing. To give everybody his dues. Let everyone have what's coming to him. To do the right thing by anyone. If 2 people do the same thing and they let one go without punishment, that is not justice. Approximately 38% of 102 correct responses refer to treating everybody the same way. 25% doing the square thing, 12% were concrete illustrations, and 4% were definitions of what justice is not. Unsatisfactory. It means to have peace. It is where they have court. It's the courthouse, to be honest. Where one is just, minus unless further explained. To do right, minus unless in explaining right the subject gives a definition of justice. It is very necessary in case of such answers as justice is to do right, to be just, etc., that the subject be urged to explain further what he means. To do right includes nearly 12% of all answers and is given by the very brightest children. Most of these are able, when urged, to complete the definition in a satisfactory manner. Remarks. The reader may be surprised that the ability to define common abstract words should develop so late. Most children who have had anything like ordinary home or school environment have doubtless heard all of these words countless times before the age of 12 years. Nevertheless, the statistics from the test show unmistakably that before this age such words have but limited and vague meaning. Other vocabulary studies confirm this fact so completely that we may say there is hardly any trait in which 12 to 14-year intelligence more uniformly excels that of the 9 or 10-year level. This is readily understandable when we consider the nature of abstract meanings and the intellectual processes by which we arrive at them. Unlike such words as tree, house, etc., the ideas they contain are not the immediate result of perceptual processes, in which even childish intelligence is adept, but are a refined and secondary product of relationships between other ideas that require the logical processes of comparison, abstraction, and generalization. One cannot see justice, for example, but one is often confronted with situations in which justice or injustice is an element, and give a certain degree of abstraction and generalization. Out of such situations, the idea of justice will gradually be evolved. The formation and use of abstract ideas of one kind or another represent, par excellence, the higher thought processes. It is not without significance that delinquents who test near the borderline of mental deficiency show such inferior ability in arriving at correct generalizations regarding matters of social and moral relationships. We cannot expect a mind of defective generalizing ability to form very definite or correct notions about justice, law, fairness, ownership rights, etc. And if the ideas themselves are not fairly clear, the rules of conduct based upon them cannot make a very powerful appeal. Bennett used the words charity, justice, and kindness, and required 2 successes. In the 1911 revision, he shifted the test from Year XI to Year XII, where it more nearly belongs. Goddard also places it in Year XII and uses Bennett's words, translating bont, however, as goodness instead of kindness. Coleman retains the test in Year XI and has bravery and revenge, requiring 3 correct definitions out of 5. Bobertag uses pity, envy, and justice, requires 2 correct definitions, and finds the test just hard enough for Year XII. After using the words goodness and kindness in 2 series of tests, we have discarded them as objectionable in that they give rise to so many doubtful definitions. Even intelligent children often say goodness means to do something good, kindness means to be kind to someone, etc. These definitions in a circle occur less than half as often with pity, revenge, and envy, which are also superior to charity and justice in this respect. The relative difficulty of our 5 words is indicated by the order in which we have listed them in the test, i.e. beginning with the easiest and ending with the hardest. On the standard of 3 correct definitions, these words fit very accurately in Year XII. Test 3, the Ball and Field Test, Superior Plan. Procedure, as in Year VIII, Test 1. Scoring. Score 3, or Superior Plan, is required for passing in Year XII. Test 4. Dissected Sentences. The following disarranged sentences are used. For the started, an, we, country, early, at hour. 2. Asked, paper, my, teacher, correct, I, my. A. Defends, dog, good, his, bravely, master. These should be printed in type like that used above. The Stanford record booklet contains the sentences in convenient form. It is not permissible to substitute written words or printed script, as that would make the test harder. All the words should be printed in caps in order that no clue shall be given as to the first word in a sentence. For a similar reason, the period is omitted. Procedure. Say, here is a sentence that has the words all mixed up so that they don't make any sense. If the words were changed around in the right order, they would make a good sentence. Look carefully and see if you can tell me how the sentence ought to read. Give the sentences in the order in which they are listed in the record booklet. Do not tell the subject to see how quickly he can do it, because with this test, any suggestion of hurrying is likely to produce a kind of mental paralysis. If the subject has no success with the first sentence in 1 minute, read it off correctly for him, somewhat slowly, and pointing to each word as it is spoken. Then proceed to the second and third, allowing 1 minute for each. Give no further help. It is not permissible, in case an incorrect response is given, to ask the subject to try again, or to say, "Are you sure that is right? Are you sure you have not left out any words?" etc. Instead, maintain absolute silence. However, the subject is permitted to make as many changes in his response as he sees fit, provided he makes them spontaneously and within the allotted time. Record the entire response. Once in a great while, the subject misunderstands the task and thinks the only requirement is to use all the words given, and that it is permitted to add as many other words as he likes. It is then necessary to repeat the instructions and to allow a new trial. Scoring. 2 sentences out of the 3 must be correctly given within the minute allotted to each. It is understood, of course, that if the first sentence has to be read for the subject, both the other responses must be given correctly. A sentence is not counted correct if a single word is omitted, altered, or inserted, or if the order given fails to make perfect sense. Certain responses are not absolutely incorrect, but are objectionable as regards sentence structure, or else fail to give the exact meaning intended. These are given half credit. Full credit on one and half credit on each of the other 2 is satisfactory. The following are samples of satisfactory and unsatisfactory responses. A. Satisfactory. We started for the country at an early hour. At an early hour we started for the country. We started at an early hour for the country. Unsatisfactory. We started early at an hour for the country. Early at an hour we started for the country. We started early for the country. Half credit. For the country at an early hour we started. For the country we started at an early hour. B. Satisfactory. I asked my teacher to correct my paper. Unsatisfactory. My teacher asked to correct my paper. To correct my paper, I asked my teacher. Half credit. My teacher I asked to correct my paper. C. Satisfactory. A good dog defends his master bravely. A good dog bravely defends his master. Unsatisfactory. A dog defends his master bravely. A bravely dog defends his master.
A good dog defends his bravely master.
A good brave dog defends his master. Half credit. A dog defends his good master bravely. A dog bravely defends his good master. A good master bravely defends his dog. Remarks. This is an excellent test. It involves no knowledge which may not be presupposed at the age in which it is given, and success therefore depends very little on experience. The worst that can be urged against it is that it may possibly be influenced to a certain extent by the amount of reading the subject has done. But this has not been demonstrated. At any rate, the test satisfies the most important requirement of a test of intelligence, namely, the percentage of successes increases rapidly and steadily from the lower to the higher levels of mental age. This experiment can be regarded as a variation of the completion test. Binet tells us, in fact, that it was directly suggested by the experiment of Ebbinghaus. As will readily be observed, however, it differs to a certain extent from the Ebbinghaus completion test. Ebbinghaus omits part of a sentence and requires the subject to supply the omissions. In this test, we give all the parts and require the formation of a sentence by rearrangement. The 2 experiments are psychologically similar in that they require the subject to relate given fragments into a meaningful whole. Success depends upon the ability of intelligence to utilize hints or clues, and this in turn depends on the logical integrity of the associated processes. All but the highest grade of the feeble-minded fail with this test. This test is found in Year XI of Binet's 1908 series and in Year XII of his 1911 revisions. Goddard and Coleman retain it in the original location. That it is better placed in Year XII is indicated by all the available statistics with normal children except those of Goddard. With the exception, the results of various investigators for Year XII are in remarkably close agreement, as the following figures will show. Percent passing at Year XII. Binet, 66. Coleman, 68. Bobertag, 78. Doherty, 64. Strong, 72. Levis de Morel, 70. Stanford Series 1911, 62. Stanford Series 1913, 57. Stanford Series 1914, 62. Princeton data, 61. This agreement is noteworthy considering that no two experiments seem to have used exactly the same arrangement of words, and that some have presented the words of a sentence in a single line, others in 2 or 3 lines. A single line would appear to be somewhat easier. Test 5. Interpretation of fables, score 4. The following fables are used. A. Hercules and the Wagoner. A man was driving along a country road when the wheels suddenly sank into a deep rut. The man did nothing but look at the wagon and call loudly to Hercules to come and help him. Hercules came up, looked at the man and said, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, my man, and whip your oxen." Then he went away and left the driver. B. The Milkmaid and Her Plans. A milkmaid was carrying her pail of milk on her head and was thinking to herself thus, "The money for this milk will buy 4 hens. The hens will lay at least 100 eggs. The eggs will produce at least 75 chicks. And with the money with which the chicks will bring I will buy a new dress to wear instead of the ragged one I have on." At this moment she looked down at herself, trying to think how she would look in her new dress. But as she did so, the pail of milk slipped from her head and dashed upon the ground. Thus all her imaginary schemes perished in a moment. C. The Fox and the Crow. A crow, having stolen a bit of meat, perched in a tree and held it in her beak. A fox, seeing her, wished to secure the meat, and spoke to the crow thus, "How handsome you are, and I have heard that the beauty of your voice is equal to that of your form and feathers. Will you not sing for me, that I may judge whether this is true?" The crow was so pleased that she opened her mouth to sing and dropped the meat, which the fox immediately ate. D. The Farmer and the Stork. A farmer set some traps to catch cranes which had been eating his seed. With them he caught a stork. The stork, which had not really been stealing, begged the farmer to spare his life, saying that he was a bird of excellent character, that he was not like all the cranes, and that the farmer should have pity on him. But the farmer said, "I have caught you with these robbers, and you will have to die with them." E. The Miller, His Son, and the Donkey. A miller and his son were driving their donkey to a neighbouring town to sell him. They had not gone far when a child saw them and cried out, "What fools those fellows are to be trudging along on foot when one of them might be riding." The old man, hearing this, made his son get on the donkey while himself walked. Soon they came upon some men. "Look," said one of them, "see that lazy boy riding while his old father has to walk." On hearing this, the miller made his son get off and he climbed on the donkey himself. Farther on they met a company of women who shouted out, "Why, you lazy old fellow, to ride along so comfortably while your poor boy there can hardly keep pace by the side of you." And so the good-natured miller took his boy up behind him and both of them rode. As they came to the town, a citizen said to them, "Why, you cruel fellows, you two are better able to carry the poor little donkey than he is to carry you." "Very well," said the miller, "we will try." So both of them jumped to the ground, got some ropes, tied the donkey's legs to a pole, and tried to carry him. But as they crossed the bridge, the donkey became frightened, kicked loose, and fell into the stream. Procedure. Present the fables in the order in which they are given above. The method is to say to the subject, "You know what a fable is. You have heard fables?" Whatever the answer, proceed to explain a fable as follows. A fable, you know, is a little story, and is meant to teach us a lesson. Now I am going to read a fable to you. Listen carefully, and when I am through I will ask you to tell me what lesson the fable teaches us. Ready? Listen. After reading the fable, say, "What lesson does that teach us?" Record the response verbatim and proceed with the next as follows. "Here is another. Listen again and tell me what lesson this fable teaches us," etc. As far as possible, avoid comment or commendation until all the fables have been given. If the first answer is of an inferior type and we express too much satisfaction with it, we thereby encourage the subject to continue in his error. On the other hand, never express dissatisfaction with a response, however absurd or malapropos it may be. Many subjects are anxious to know how well they are doing and continuously ask, "Did I get that one right?" It is sufficient to say, "You are getting along nicely," or something to that effect. Offer no comments, suggestions, or questions which might put the subject on the right track. This much self-control is necessary if we would make the conditions of the test uniform for all subjects.
The only occasion when a supplementary question is permissible is in the case of a response whose meaning is not clear. Even then, we must be cautious and restrict ourselves to some such question as, "What do you mean?" or "Explain, I don't quite understand what you mean."
The scoring of fables is somewhat difficult at best, and this additional question is often sufficient to place the response very definitely in the right or wrong column. Scoring. Give score 2, i.e. 2 points, for a correct answer, and 1 for an answer which deserves half credit. The test is passed in Year XII if 4 points are earned, that is, if 2 responses are correct, or if 1 is correct and 2 deserve half credit. Score 2 means that the fable has been correctly interpreted and that the lesson it teaches has been stated in general terms. There are 2 types of responses which may be given half credit. They include 1. The interpretations which are stated in general terms and are fairly plausible, but are not exactly correct, and 2. Those which are perfectly correct as to substance, but are not generalized. We overlook ordinary faults of expression and regard merely the essential meaning of the response. The only way to explain the method is by giving copious illustrations. If the following sample responses are carefully studied, a reasonable degree of expertness in scoring fables may be acquired with only a limited amount of actual practice. The sampling may appear to the reader needlessly prolix, but experience has taught us that in giving directions for the scoring of tests, error always lies on the side of taking too much for granted. A. Hercules and the Wagoner. Full credit, score 2. God helps those who help themselves. Do not depend on others. Help yourself before calling for help. It teaches that we should rely on ourselves. The following are not quite so good, but are nevertheless considered satisfactory. We should always try, even if it looks hard and we think we can't do it. When in trouble, try to get out of it yourself. We have got to do things without help, not to be lazy. Half credit, score 1. This is most often given for the response which contains the correct idea but states it in terms of the concrete situation. E.g., the man ought to have tried himself first. Hercules wanted to teach the man to help himself. The driver was too much inclined to depend on others. The man was too lazy. He should not have called for help until he had tried to get out by himself. To get out and try instead of watching. Unsatisfactory, score 0. Failures are mainly of 5 varieties. 1. Generalized interpretations, which entirely miss the point. 2. Crude interpretations, which not only miss the point, but are also stated in terms of the concrete situation. 3. Irrelevant or incoherent remarks. 4. Efforts to repeat the story. And 5. Inability to respond. Simple failures of type 1. Entirely incorrect generalizations. Teaches us to look where we are going. Not to ask for anything when there is no one to help. To help those who are in trouble. Teaches us to be polite. How to help others. Not to be cruel to horses. Always to do what people tell you, or to obey orders, etc. Not to be foolish or stupid, etc. If you would have a thing well done, do it yourself. Failures of type 2, crude interpretations stated in concrete terms. How to get out of the mud. Not to get stuck in the mud. To carry a stick along to pry yourself out if you get into a mud hole. To help anyone who is stuck in the mud. Taught Hercules to help the horses along and not to whip them too hard. Not to be mean like Hercules. Failures of type 3. Irrelevant responses. It was foolish not to thank him. He should have helped the driver. Hercules was mean. If anyone helps himself, the horses will try. The driver should have done what Hercules told him. He wanted the man to help the oxen. Type 4. Efforts to repeat the story. And type 5. Inability to respond. B. The Maid and the Eggs. Full credit, score 2. Teaches us not to build air castles. Don't count your chickens before they are hatched. Not to plan too far ahead. Slightly inferior but still acceptable. Never make too many plans. Don't count on the second thing till you have done the first. Half credit, score 1. It teaches us not to have our minds on the future when we can carry milk on the head. She was building air castles and she lost her milk. She was planning too far ahead. The responses just given are examples of fairly correct interpretations in non-generalized terms. The following are examples of generalized interpretations which fall below the accuracy required for full credit. Never make plans. Not to be too proud. To keep our mind on what we are doing. Don't cross a bridge till you come to it. Don't count your eggs before they are hatched. Not to be wanting things. Learn to wait. Not to imagine. Go ahead and do it. Unsatisfactory, score 0. Type 1. Entirely incoherent generalization. that money does not buy everything, not to be greedy, not to be selfish, not to waste things, not to take risks like that, not to think about clothes. Count your chickens before they are hatched. Type 2. Very crude interpretations stated in concrete terms, not to carry milk on the head.
Teaches her to watch and not throw down her head.
To carry her head straight, not to spill milk, to keep your chickens and you will make more money. Type 3. Irrelevant responses. She wanted the money. Teaches us to read and write. 18-year-old of 8-year intelligence. About a girl who was selling some milk. Type 4. Effort to repeat the story. Type 5. Inability to respond.
C. The Fox and the Crow. Full credit, score 2. Teaches us not to listen to flattery. Don't let yourself be flattered. It is not safe to believe people who flatter us. We had better look out for people who brag on us. Half credit, score 1. Correct idea in concrete terms. The crow was so proud of herself that she lost all she had. The crow listened to flattery and got left. Not to be proud and let people think you can sing when you can't. If anybody brags on you, don't sing or do what he tells you. Pertinent, but somewhat inferior generalizations. Not to be too proud. Pride goes before a fall. To be on our guard against people who are our enemies. Not to do everything people tell you. Don't trust every slick fellow you meet. Unsatisfactory, score 0. Type 1. Incorrect generalization. Not to go with people you don't know. Not to be selfish. To share your food. Look before you leap. Not to listen to evil. Not to steal. Teaches honesty. Not to covet. Think for yourself. Teaches wisdom. Never listen to advice. Never let anyone get ahead of you. To figure out what they are going to do. Never try to do 2 things at once. How to get what you want. Type 2. Very crude interpretation stated in terms of the concrete situation. Not to sing before you eat. Not to hold a thing in your mouth, eat it. To eat a thing before you think of your beauty. To swallow it before you sing. To be on your watch when you have food in your mouth. Type 3. Irrelevant responses. The fox was greedy. The fox was slicker than what the crow was. The crow ought not to have opened her mouth. The crow should have just shaken her head. It served the crow right for stealing the meat. The fox wanted the meat and just told the crow that to get it. Foolishness. Guess that's where the old fox got his name, Old Foxy. Don't teach us anything. Type 4. Efforts to repeat the story. Type 5. Inability to respond. D. The Farmer and the Stork. Full credit, score 2. You are judged by the company you keep. Teaches us to keep out of bad company. Birds of a feather flock together. If you go with bad people, you are counted like them. We should choose our friends carefully. Don't go with bad people. Teaches us to avoid the appearance of evil. Half credit, score 1. The stork should not have been with the cranes. Teaches him not to go with robbers. Don't go with people who are not of your nation. Not to follow others. Unsatisfactory, score 0. Type 1. Incorrect generalization. Not to steal, not to tell lies, not to give excuses. A poor excuse is better than none. Not to trust what people say. Not to listen to excuses. Not to harm animals that do no harm. To have pity on others. Not to be cruel. To be kind to birds. Not to blame people for what they don't do. Teaches that those who do good often suffer for those who do evil. To tend to your own business. Not to meddle with other people's things. Not to trespass on people's property. Not to think you are so nice. To keep out of mischief. Type 2. Very crude interpretations in concrete terms. Taught the stork to look where it stepped and not walk into a trap. Taught the stork to keep out of the man's field. Not to take the seeds. Type 3. Irrelevant responses. The farmer was right. Storks do eat grain. Served the stork right. He was stealing too. He should try to help the stork out of the field. Type 4. Efforts to repeat the story. Type 5. Inability to reply.
E. The Miller, His Son and the Donkey. Full credit, score 2. When you try to please everybody, you please nobody. Don't listen to everybody. You can't please them all. Don't take everyone's advice. Don't try to do what everybody tells you. Use your own judgment. Have a mind of your own. Make up your mind and stick to it. Don't be wishy-washy. Have confidence in your own opinions. Half credit, score 1. Interpretations which are generalized but somewhat inferior. Never take anyone's advice. Too sweeping a conclusion. Don't take foolish advice. Take your own advice. It teaches us that people don't always agree. Correct idea but not generalized. They were forced to listen to everybody. They should have walked or rode just as they thought best, without listening to other people. Unsatisfactory, score 0, type 1. Incorrect generalization. To do right. To do what people tell you. To be kind to old people. To be polite. To serve others. Not to be cruel to animals. To have sympathy for beasts of burden. To be good-natured. Not to load things on animals that are small. That it is always better to leave things as they are. That men were not made for beasts of burden. Type 2. Very crude interpretations stated in concrete terms. Not to try to carry the donkey. That walking is better than riding. The people should have been more polite to the old man. That the father should be allowed to ride. Type 3. Irrelevant responses. The men were too heavy for the donkey. They ought to have stayed on, and they would not have fallen into the stream. It teaches about a man and he lost his donkey. Type 4. Efforts to repeat the story. Type 5. Inability to respond. Remarks. The fable test, or the test of generalization, as it may aptly be named, was used by the writer in a study of the intellectual processes of bright and dull boys in 1905. It was further standardized by the writer and Mr. Childs in 1911. It has proved its worth in a number of investigations. It has been necessary, however, to simplify the rather elaborate method of scoring which was proposed in 1911, not because of any logical fault of the method, but because of the difficulty in teaching examiners the use of the system correctly. The method explained above is somewhat coarser, but it has the advantage of being much easier to learn. The generalization test presents for interpretation situations which are closely paralleled in the everyday social experience of human beings. It tests the subject's ability to understand motives underlying acts or attitudes, gives a clue to the status of the social consciousness. This is highly important in the diagnosis of the upper range of mental defectiveness. The criterion of the subnormal's fitness for life outside an institution is his ability to understand social relations and to adjust himself to them. Failure of a subnormal to meet this criterion may lead him to break common conventions and to appear disrespectful, sulky, stubborn, or in some other way queer and exceptional. He is likely to be misunderstood because he so easily misunderstands others. The skein of human motives is too complex for his limited intelligence to untangle. Ethnological studies have shown in an interesting way the social origin of the moral judgment. The rectitude of the moral life, therefore, depends on the accuracy of the social judgment. It would be interesting to know what proportion of offenders have transgressed moral codes because of continued failure to grasp the essential lessons presented by human situations. For the intelligent child, even the common incidents of life carry an endless succession of lessons in right conduct. On the average school playground, not an hour passes without some happening which is fraught with a moral hint to those who have intelligence enough to generalize the situation. A boy plays unfairly and is barred from the game. One bullies his weak companion and arouses the anger and scorn of all his fellows. Another vents his braggadocio and feels at once the withering scorn of those who listen. Laziness, selfishness, meanness, dishonesty, ingratitude, inconstancy, inordinate pride, and the countless other faults all have their social penalties. The child of normal intelligence sees the point, draws the appropriate lesson, and provided emotions and will are also normal, applies it more or less effectively as a guide to his own conduct. To the feeble-minded child, all but lacking in the power of abstraction and generalization, the situation conveys no such lesson, but it is a muddle of concrete events without general significance, or even if its meaning is vaguely apprehended. The powers of inhibition are insufficient to guarantee that right action will follow. It is for this reason that the generalization test is so valuable in the mental examinations of delinquents. It presents a moral situation, imagined to be sure, but none the less real to the individual of normal comprehension. It tells us quickly whether the subject tested is able to see beyond the incidents of the given situation and to grasp their wider relations, whether he is able to generalize the concrete. The following responses made by feeble-minded delinquents from 16 to 21 years of age demonstrate sufficiently their inability to comprehend the moral situation. Hercules and the Wagoner teaches you to look where you are going, not to help anyone who is stuck in the mud, not to whip oxen. Teaches that Hercules was mean. Teaches us to carry a stick along to pry the wheels out. The Fox and the Crow. Not to sing when eating, to keep away from strangers, to swallow it before you sing, not to be stingy, not to listen to evil. The fox was wiser than the crow, not to be selfish with food, not to do two things at once, to hang on to what you've got. The Farmer and the Stork. Teaches the stork to look where he steps, not to be cruel like the farmer, not to tell lies, not to butt into other people's things, to be kind to birds. Teaches us how to get rid of troublesome people. Never go with anything else. The following are responses of an 18-year-old delinquent, intelligence level 10 years, to the 5 fables. Maid and Eggs. She was thinking about getting the dress and spilled the milk. Teaches selfishness. Hercules and the Wagoner. He wanted to help the oxen out. Fox and Crow. Guesses where the fox got his name. Old Foxy. Don't teach us anything. Farmer and Stork. Tried and helped the stork out of the field. Miller, Son and Donkey. They was all big fools and mean to the donkey. One does not require very profound psychological insight to see that a person of this degree of comprehension is not promising material for moral education. His weakness in the ability to generalize a moral situation is not due to lack of instruction, but is inherent in the nature of his mental processes, all of which have the infantile quality of average 9 or 10-year intelligence. Well-instructed, normal children of 10 years ordinarily succeed no better. The ability to draw the correct lesson from a social situation is little developed below the mental level of 12 or 13 years. The test is also valuable because it throws light on the subject's ability to appreciate the finer shades of meaning. The mentally retarded often show marked inferiority in this respect. They sense perhaps, in a general way, the trend of the story, but they fail to comprehend much that to us seems clearly expressed. They do not get what is left for the reader to infer because they are insensible to the thought fringes. It is these which give meaning to the fable. The dull subject may be able to image the objects and activities described, but taken in the rough such imagery gets him nowhere. Finally, the test is almost free from the danger of coaching. The subject who has been given a number of fables along with 25 or 30 other tests can, as a rule, give only hazy and inaccurate testimony as to what he has been put through. Moreover, we have found that, even if a subject has previously heard a fable, that fact does not materially increase his chances of giving a correct interpretation. If the situation depicted in the fable is beyond the subject's power of comprehension, even explicit instruction has little effect upon the quality of the response. Incidentally, this observation raises a question whether the use of proverbs, mottos, fables, poetry, etc. in the moral instruction of children may not often be futile because the material is not fitted to the child's power of comprehension. Much of the school's instruction in history and literature has a moral purpose, but there is reason to suspect that in this field schools often make precocious attempts in generalizing exercises. Test 6. Repeating 5 digits reversed. The series are 31879, 69482, 52961. Procedure and scoring. Exactly as in Years 7 and 9. Test 7. Interpretation of pictures. Procedure. Use the same pictures as in Year 3 Test 1 and Year 7 Test 2 and the additional picture D. Present in the same order. The formula to begin with is identical with that in Year 7 Test 2. Tell me what this picture is about. What is this a picture of? This formula is chosen because it does not suggest specifically either description or interpretation, and is therefore adapted to show the child's spontaneous or natural mode of perception. However, in case this formula fails to bring spontaneous interpretation for 3 of the 4 pictures, We then return to those pictures on which the subject has failed and give a second trial with the formula "explain this picture." A good many subjects who fail to interpret the picture spontaneously do so without difficulty when the more specific formula is used. If the response is so brief as to be difficult to classify, the subject should be urged to amplify by some such injunctions as "go ahead" or "explain what you mean." One more caution. It is necessary to refrain from voicing a single word of commendation or approval until all the pictures have been responded to. A moment's thought will reveal the absolute necessity of adhering to this rule. Often the subject will begin by giving an inferior type of response, description say, to the first picture, but with the second picture adjusts better to the task and responds satisfactorily. If in such a case the first unsatisfactory response was greeted with an approval, "That's fine, you were doing splendidly," the likelihood of any improvement taking place as the test proceeds will be greatly lessened. Scoring. 3 pictures out of 4 must be satisfactorily interpreted. Satisfactory means that the interpretation given should be reasonably plausible, not necessarily the exact one the artist had in mind, yet not absurd. The following classified responses will serve as a fairly secure guide for scoring. A. Dutch home. Satisfactory. Child has spilled something and is getting a scolding. The baby has hurt herself and the mother is comforting her. The baby is crying because she is hungry and the mother has nothing to give her. The little girl has been naughty and is about to be punished. The baby is crying because she does not like her dinner. There is bread on the table and the mother won't let the little girl have it, and so she is crying. The baby is begging for something and is crying because her mama won't give it to her. It's a poor family. The father is dead and they don't have enough to eat. Unsatisfactory. The baby is crying and the mother is looking at her. Description. It's in Holland and there's a little girl crying and the mama and there's a dish on the table. Mainly description. The mother is teaching the child to walk. Absurd interpretation. B. River scene. Satisfactory. Man and lady eloping to get married and an Indian to row for them. I think it represents a honeymoon trip. In frontier days, and a man and his wife have been captured by the Indians. It's a perilous journey and they have engaged the Indian to row for them. Unsatisfactory. They are shooting the rapids. An Indian rowing a man and his wife down the river. Mainly description. A storm at sea. Absurd interpretation. Indians have rescued a couple from a shipwreck. They have been up the river and are riding down the rapids. The following responses are somewhat doubtful, but should probably be scored minus. People are going out hunting and have Indian for a guide. The man has rescued the woman from the Indians. It's a camping trip. C. Post office. Satisfactory. It's a lot of old farmers. They have come to the post office to get the paper, which only comes once a week, and they are all happy. There's something funny in the paper about one of the men, and they are all laughing about it. They are reading about the price of eggs, and they look very happy, so I guess the price has gone up. It's a bunch of country politicians reading the election news. Unsatisfactory. A man has just come out of the post office and is reading to his friends. It's a little country town and they are looking at the paper. A man is reading the paper and the others are looking on and laughing. Some men are reading a paper and laughing, and the other man has brought some eggs to the market, and it's in a little country town. All the above are mainly description. Responses like the following are somewhat better, but hardly satisfactory. They are reading something funny in the paper. They are reading the ads. They are laughing about something in the newspaper, etc. D. Colonial home. Satisfactory. They are lovers and haven't quarreled. The man has to go away for a long time, maybe to war, and she is afraid he won't return. He has proposed and she has rejected him, and she is crying because she hated to disappoint him. The woman is crying because her husband is angry and leaving her. The man is a messenger and has brought the woman bad news. Unsatisfactory. The husband is leaving and the dog is looking at the lady. It's a picture to show how people dress in colonial times. The lady is crying and the man is trying to comfort her. The man is going away. The woman is angry because he is going. The dog has a ball in its mouth and looks happy, and the man looks sad. Such responses as the following are doubtful, but rather minus than plus. A picture of George Washington's home. They have lost their money and they are sad. Gratuitous interpretation. The man has struck the woman. Doubt sometimes arises as to the proper scoring of imaginative or gratuitous interpretations. The following are samples of such. A. The little girl is crying because she wants a new dress, and the mother is telling her she can have one when Christmas comes if she will be good. B. The man and woman have gone up the river to visit some friends, and an Indian guide is bringing them home. C. Some old rubes are reading about a circus that's going to come. D. Napoleon leaving his wife.
Sometimes these imaginative responses are given by very bright subjects, under the impression that they are asked to make up a story based on the pictures.
We may score them plus, provided they are not too much out of harmony with the situation and actions represented in the picture. Interpretations so gratuitous as to have little or no bearing upon the scene depicted should be scored minus. Remarks. The test of pictures interpretation has been variously located from 12 to 15 years. It cannot be too strongly emphasized that everything depends on the nature of the pictures used, the form in which the question is put, and the standard of scoring. The Jingleman Jack pictures used by Coleman are as easy to interpret at 10 years as the Stanford pictures at 12. Spontaneous interpretation, what is this a picture of, or what do you see in this picture, comes no more readily at 14 years than provoked interpretation, explain this picture at 12. The standard of scoring is no less important. If with the Stanford pictures we require 3 satisfactory responses out of 4, the test belongs at the 12-year level, but the standard of 2 correct out of 4 can be met a year or 2 earlier. Even after we have agreed upon a given series of pictures, the formula for giving the test, and upon the requisite number of passes, there remains still the questions as to the proper degree of liberality in deciding what constitutes interpretation. There is no single point in mental development where the ability to interpret pictures sweeps in with a rush. Like the development of most other abilities, it comes by in slow degrees, beginning even as early as 6 years. The question is therefore to decide whether a given response contains as much and as good interpretation as we have a right to expect at the age level where the test has been placed. It is imperative for anyone who would use the scale correctly to acquaint himself thoroughly with the procedure and standards described above.
Test 8. Giving similarities. 3 things.
Procedure. The procedure is the same as in Year VIII, Test 4, but with the following words. A. Snake, cow, sparrow. B. Book, teacher, newspaper. C. Wool, cotton, leather. D. Knife blade, penny, piece of wire. E. Rose, potato, tree. As before, a little tactful urging is occasionally necessary in order to secure a response. Scoring. 3 satisfactory responses out of 5 are necessary for success. Any real similarity is acceptable, whether fundamental or superficial, although the giving of fundamental likenesses is especially symptomatic of good intelligence. Failures may be classified into 4 heads. 1. Leaving one of the words out of consideration. 2. Giving a difference instead of a similarity. 3. Giving a similarity that is not real or that is too bizarre or far-fetched. And 4. Inability to respond. Types 1, 3, and 4 are almost equally numerous, while Type 2 is not often encountered at this level of intelligence. This test provokes doubtful responses somewhat oftener than the earlier test of giving similarities. Those giving greatest difficulty are the indefinite statements like, all are useful, all are made of the same material, etc. Fortunately, in most of these cases, an additional question is sufficient to determine whether the subject has in mind a real similarity. Questions suitable for this purpose are, explain what you mean. In what respect are they all useful? What material do you mean, etc. Of course, it is only permissible to make use of supplementary questions of this kind when they are necessary in order to clarify a response which has already been made. While the amateur examiner is likely to have more or less trouble in deciding upon scores, this difficulty rapidly disappears with experience. The following samples of satisfactory and unsatisfactory responses will serve as a fairly adequate guide in dealing with doubtful cases. A. Snake, cow, sparrow. Satisfactory. All are animals or creatures, etc. All live on land. All have blood or flesh, bones, eyes, skin, etc. All move about. All breathe air. All are useful, plus only if subject can give a use which they have in common. All have a little intelligence, or sense, instinct, etc. Unsatisfactory.
All have legs. All are dangerous. All feed on grain or grass, etc. All are much afraid of man. All frighten you. All are warm-blooded. All get about the same way. All walk on the ground. All can bite. All hollow. All drink water. A snake crawls, a cow walks, and a sparrow flies, or some other difference. They are not alike. B. Book, teacher, newspaper. Satisfactory. All teach. You learn from all. All give you information. All help you get an education. All are your good friends, plus if subject can explain how. All are useful, plus if subject can explain how. Unsatisfactory. All tell you the news. A teacher writes, and a book and newspaper have writing. They are not alike. All read. All use the alphabet. C. Wool, cotton, leather. Satisfactory. All used for clothing. We wear them all. All grow, plus if subject can explain. All have to be sent to the factory to be made into things. All are useful, plus if subject can give a use which they all have in common. All are valuable, plus if explained. Unsatisfactory. All come from plants. All grow on animals. All came off the top of something. All are things. They are pretty. All spell alike. All are furry or soft, hard, etc. D. Knife blade, penny, piece of wire. Satisfactory. All are made from minerals or metals. All come from mines. All are hard material. Unsatisfactory. All are made of steel or copper, iron, etc. All are made of the same material. All cut. All bend easily. All are used in building a house. All are worthless. All are useful in fixing things. All have an end. They are small. All weigh the same. Can get them all at a hardware store. You can buy things with all of them. You buy them with money. One is sharp, one is round, and one is long, or some other difference. Such answers as all are found in a boy's pocket or boys like them are not altogether bad, but hardly deserve to be called satisfactory. All are useful is minus unless the subject can give a use which they have in common, which in this case he is not likely to do. Bizarre uses are also minus, as all are good for a watch fob. Can use all for paperweights, etc. E. Rose, potato, tree. Satisfactory. All are plants. All grow from the ground. All have leaves or roots, etc. All have to be planted. All are parts of nature. All have colors. Unsatisfactory. All are pretty. All bear fruit. All have pretty flowers. All grow on bushes. All are valuable or useful. They grow close to a house. All are ornamental. All are shrubbery. Remarks. The words of each series lend themselves readily to classification into a next higher class. This is the best type of response, but with most of the series it accounts for less than 2/3 of the success among subjects of 12-year intelligence. The proportion is less than 1/3 for subjects of 10-year intelligence and nearly 3/4 at the 14-year level. It would be possible and very desirable to devise and standardize an additional test of this kind, but requiring the giving of an essential resemblance or classificatory similarity. For discussion of the psychological factors involved in the similarities test, see Year VIII, Test 4. End of Chapter 17 of The Measurement of Intelligence. Read by Leon Harvey. Chapter 18 of The Measurement of Intelligence by Lewis Terman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 18. Instructions for Year XIV. Test 1. Vocabulary. 50 definitions, 9,000 words. Procedure and scoring. As in Year 8, Year 10, and Year 12,
At Year 14, 50 words must be correctly defined. Test 2. Induction Test, Finding a Rule. Procedure. Provide 6 sheets of thin black paper, say 8.5 by 11 inches. Take the first sheet, and telling the subject to watch what you do, fold it once, and in the middle of the folded edge, tear out or cut out a small notch. Then ask the subject to tell you how many holes there will be in the paper when it is unfolded. The correct answer, 1, is nearly always given without hesitation, but whatever the answer, unfold the paper and hold it up broadside for the subject's inspection. Next, take another sheet, fold it once as before and say, "Now, when we folded it this way and tore out a piece, you remember it made 1 hole in the paper. This time we will give the paper another fold and see how many holes we shall have." Then proceed to fold the paper again, this time in the other direction, and tear out a piece from the folded side and ask how many holes there will be when the paper is unfolded. After recording the answer, unfold the paper. Hold it up before the subject so as to let him see the result. The answer is often incorrect, and the unfolded sheet is greeted with an exclamation of surprise. The governing principle is seldom made out at this stage of the experiment, but regardless of the correctness or incorrectness of the first and second answers, proceed with the third sheet. Fold it once and say, "When we folded it this way, there was 1 hole." Then fold it again and say, "And when we folded it this way, there were 2 holes." At this point, fold the paper a third time and say, "Now I am folding it again. How many holes will it have this time when I unfold it?" Record the answer and again unfold the paper while the subject looks on. Continue in the same manner with sheets 4, 5, and 6, adding 1 fold each time. In folding each sheet, recapitulate the results with the previous sheets, saying, with 6, for example, "When we folded it this way, there was 1 hole. When we folded it again, there were 2. When we folded it again, there were 4. When we folded it again, there were 8. When we folded it again, there were 16. Now tell me how many holes there will be if we fold it once more." In the recapitulation, avoid the expression, "when we folded it once, twice, 3 times, etc., as this often leads the subject to double the numeral heard instead of doubling the number of holes in the previously folded sheet. After the answer is given, do not fail to unfold the paper and let the subject view the result. Scoring. The test is passed if the rule is grasped by the time the 6th sheet is reached. That is, the subject may pass another 5 incorrect responses, provided the 6th is correct and the governing rule can then be given. It is not permissible to ask for the rule until all 6 parts of the experiment have been given. Nothing must be said which could even suggest the operation of a rule. Often, however, the subject grasps the principle after 2 or 3 steps and gives it spontaneously. In this case, it is unnecessary to proceed with the remaining steps. Remarks. This test was first used by the writer in a comparative study of the intellectual processes of bright and dull boys in 1905, but it was not standardized until 1914. Rather extensive data indicate that it is a genuine test of intelligence. Of 14-year-old school children testing between 96 and 105 IQ, 59% passed this test. Of 14-year-olds testing below 96 IQ, 41% passed. Of those testing above 105, 71% passed. That is, the test agrees well with the results obtained by the scale as a whole. Of average adults, only 10% fail. Of the superior adults, fewer than 5%. As a rule, the higher the grade of intelligence, the fewer the steps necessary for grasping the rule. Of the superior adults, only 35% fail to get the rule as early as the end of the 4th step. The test is little affected by schooling, and apart from differences in intelligence, it is little influenced by age. Other advantages of the test are the keen interest it always arouses and its independence of language ability. It is being used successfully with immigrant subjects who had been in this country but a few months. We have named the experiment the induction test. It might be supposed that the solution would ordinarily be arrived at by deduction or by an a priori logical analysis of the principle involved. This, however, is rarely the case. Not one average adult out of 10 reasons out the situation in this purely logical manner. It is ordinarily only after 1 or more mistakes have been made and have been exposed by the examiner holding up the unfolded paper to view that the correct principle is grasped. In the absence of deductive reasoning, the subject must note that each unfolded sheet contains twice as many holes as the previous one, and must infer that following the paper again will again double the number. The ability tested is the ability to generalize from particulars where the common element of the particulars can be discerned only by the selective action of attention. In this case, attention to the fact that each number is the double of its predecessor. Test 3. Giving differences between a president and a king. Procedure. Say, there are 3 main differences between a president and a king. What are they? If the subject stops after 1 difference is given, we urge him on, if possible, until 3 are given. Scoring. The 3 differences relate to power, tenure, and manner of ascension. Only these differences are considered correct, and the successful response must include at least 2 of the 3. We disregard crudities of expression and note merely whether the subject has the essential idea. As regards power, for example, any of the following responses are satisfactory. The king is absolute and the president is not. The king rules by himself, but the president rules with the help of the people. Kings can have things their own way more than presidents can, etc. It may be objected that the reverse of this is sometimes true, that the king today often has less power than the average president. Sometimes subjects mention this fact, and when they do, we credit them with this part of the test. As a matter of fact, however, the answer is seldom given. Sometimes the subject does not stop until he has given a half dozen or more differences, and in such cases the first 3 differences may be trivial and some of the latter ones essential. The question then arises whether we should disregard the errors and pass the subject on his later correct responses. The rule in such cases is to ask the subject to pick out the 3 main differences. Sometimes ascension and tenure are given in the form of a single contrast as, the president is elected, but the king inherits his throne and rules for life. This answer entitles the subject to credit for both ascension and tenure, the contrast as regards tenure being plainly implied. Unsatisfactory contrasts are of many kinds and are often amusing. Some of the most common are the following. A king wears a crown. A king has jewels. A king sits on a throne. A king sits on a thorn, as one feeble-minded boy put it. A king lives in a palace. A king has courtiers. A king is very dignified. A king dresses up more. A president has less pomp and ceremony. A president is more ready to receive the people. A king sits on a chair all the time, and a president does not. No differences, it's just names. A president does not give titles. A king has a larger salary. A king has royal blood. A king is in more danger. They have a different title. A king is more cruel. Kings have people beheaded. A king rules in a monarchy and a president in a republic. A king rules in a foreign country. A president is elected and a king fights for his office. A president appoints governors and a king does not. A president lets the lawyers make the laws. Everybody works for a king. It is surprising to see how often trivial differences like the above are given. About 30 average adults out of 100, including high school students, give at least one unsatisfactory contrast. The test has been criticized as depending too much on schooling. The criticism is to a certain extent valid when the test is used with young subjects, say of 10 or 12 years. It is not valid, however, if the use of the test is confined to older subjects. With the latter, it is not a test of knowledge, but of the discriminative capacity to deal with knowledge already in the possession of the subject. It would be difficult to find an adult not actually feeble-minded who is ignorant of the facts called for, that the king inherits his throne while the president is elected, that the tenure of the king is for life and the president for a term of years, that kings ordinarily have or are supposed to have more power. Even the relatively stupid adult knows this, but he also knows that kings are different from presidents, in having crowns, thrones, palaces, robes, courtiers, larger pay, etc., and he makes no discrimination as regards the relative importance of these differences. The test is psychologically related to that of giving differences in Year VIII, and to the 2 tests of finding similarities, but it differs from these in requiring a comparison based on fundamental rather than accidental distinctions. The idea is good and should be worked out in additional tests of the same type. The test first appeared in the Binet Revised Scale of 1911. Kuhlmann omits it, and besides our own, there are a few statistics bearing on it. Our results show that if 2 essential differences are required, the test belongs where we have placed it, but if only 1 essential difference is required, the test is easy enough for Year 12. Test 4. Problem Questions. Procedure. Say to the subject, "Listen and see if you can understand what I read." Then read the following 3 problems, rather slowly and with expression, pausing after each long enough for the subject to find an answer. A. A man who was walking in the woods near a city stopped suddenly, very much frightened, and then ran to the nearest policeman, saying that he had just seen hanging from the limb of a tree a blank. A what? B. My neighbor has been having queer visitors. First a doctor came to his house, then a lawyer, then a minister, preacher or priest. What do you think happened there? C. An Indian who had come to town for the first time in his life saw a white man riding along the street. As a white man rode by, the Indian said, "The white man is lazy. He walks sitting down." What was the white man riding on that caused the Indian to say, "He walks sitting down"? Do not ask questions calculated to draw out the correct response, but wait in silence for the subject's spontaneous answer. It is permissible, however, to reread the passage if the subject requests it. Scoring. 2 responses out of 3 must be satisfactory. The following explanations and examples will make clear the requirements of the test. A. What the man saw hanging. Satisfactory. The only correct answer for the first is a man who had hung himself, or who had committed suicide, been hanged, etc. We may also pass the following answer. Dead branches that looked like a man hanging. A good many subjects answer simply a man. This answer cannot be scored because of the impossibility of knowing what is in the subject's mind, and in such cases it is always necessary to say, "Explain what you mean." The answer to this interrogation always enables us to score the response. Unsatisfactory. There is an endless variety of failures, a snake, a monkey, a robber, or a tramp being the most common. Others include such answers as a bear, a tiger, a wild cat, a bird, an eagle, a bird's nest, a hornet's nest, a leaf, a swig, a boy in a swing, a basket of flowers, an egg, a ghost, a white sheet, clothes, a purse, etc. B. My neighbor. Satisfactory. The expected answer is a death. Someone has died, etc. We must always check up this response, however, by asking what the lawyer came for, and this must also be answered correctly. While it is expected that the subject will understand that the doctor came to attend a sick person, the lawyer to make his will, and the minister to preach the funeral, there are a few other ingenious interpretations which pass as satisfactory. For example, a man got hurt in an accident. The doctor came to make him well, the lawyer to see about the damages, and then he died and the preacher came for the funeral. Or, a man died, the lawyer came to help the widow settle the estate, and the preacher came for the funeral. We can hardly expect the 14-year-old child to know that it is not the custom to settle an estate until after the funeral. The following excellent response was given by enlightened young eugenists. A marriage, the doctor came to examine them and see if they were fit to marry, the lawyer to arrange the marriage settlement, and the minister to marry them. The following logical responses occurred once each. A murder, the doctor came to examine the body, a lawyer to get evidence, and the preacher to preach the funeral. An unmarried girl has given birth to a child. The lawyer was employed to get the man to marry her, and then the preacher came to perform the wedding ceremony. Perhaps some will consider this interpretation too far-fetched to pass, but it is perfectly logical and unfortunately represents an occurrence which is not so very rare. If an incorrect answer is first given and then corrected, the correction is accepted. Unsatisfactory. The failures again are quite varied, but are most frequently due to failure to understand the lawyer's mission. Of 66 tabulated failures, 26 are accounted for in this way, while only 6 are due to inability to state the part played by the minister. The most common incorrect responses are a baby born, accounting for 5 out of 66 failures, a divorce, very common with the children tested by Dr. Ordal at Reno, Nevada, a marriage, a divorce and a remarriage, a dinner, an entertainment, some friends came to chat, etc. In 20 failures out of 66, marriage was incorrectly connected with a will, a divorce, the death of a child, etc. The following are not bad, but hardly deserve to pass. Sickness and trouble. The lawyer and minister came to help him out of trouble. Or, somebody was sick. The lawyer wanted his money, and the minister came to see how he was. A few present a still more logical interpretation, but so far-fetched that it is doubtful whether they should count as passes. For example, a man and his wife had a fight. One got hurt and had to have the doctor. Then they had a lawyer to get them divorced. Then the minister came to marry one of them. Again, someone is dying and is getting married and making his will before he dies. C. What the man was riding on. The only correct response is bicycle. The most common error is horse or donkey, accounting for 48 out of 71 tabulated failures. Vehicles like wagon, buggy, automobile, or streetcar were mentioned in 14 out of 71 failures. Bizarre replies are a cripple in a wheelchair, a person riding on someone's back, etc. Remarks. The experiment is a form of the completion test. Elements of the situation are given, out of which the entire situation is to be constructed. This phase of intelligence has already been discussed. While it is generally admitted that the underlying idea of this test is good, some have criticized Binet's selection of problems. Newman thinks the lawyer element of the second is so unfamiliar to children as to render that part of the test unfair. Several armchair critics have mentioned the danger of nervous shock from the first problem. Bobertag throws out the test entirely and substitutes a completion test modeled after that of Ebbinghaus. Our own results are altogether favorable to the test. If used in Year XIV, Newman's objection hardly holds, for American children of that age do ordinarily know something about making wills. As for the danger of shock from the first problem, we have never once found the slightest evidence of this much feared result. The subject always understands that the situation depicted is hypothetical, and so answers either in a matter-of-fact manner or with a laugh. The bicycle problem is our own invention. Binet used the other two and required both to be answered correctly. The test was located in Year XII of the 1908 scale and in Year XV of the 1911 revision. Goddard and Coleman retained it in the original location. The Stanford results of 1911, 1912, 1914 and 1915 agree in showing the test too difficult for Year XII, even when only 2 out of the 3 correct responses are required. If the original form of the experiment is used, it is exceedingly difficult for Year XV, as here given it fits well at Year XIV. Test 5. Arithmetical Reasoning. Procedure. The following problems, printed in clear type, are shown one at a time to the subject, who reads each problem aloud and, with the printed problem still before him, finds the answer without the use of pencil or paper. A. If a man's salary is $20 a week and he spends $14 a week, how long will it take him to save $300? B. If 2 pencils cost 5 cents, how many pencils can you buy for 50 cents? C. At 15 cents a yard, how much will 7 feet of cloth cost? Only 1 minute is allowed for each problem, but nothing is said about hurrying. While one problem is being solved, the other should be hidden from view. It is not permissible, if the subject gives an incorrect answer, to ask him to solve the problem again. The following exception, however, is made to this rule. If the answer given to the third problem indicates that the word yard has been read as feet, the subject is asked to read the problem through again carefully, aloud, and to tell how he solved it. No further help of any kind may be given. Scoring. 2 of the 3 problems must be solved correctly within the minute allotted to each. No credit is allowed for correct method if the answer is wrong. Remarks. We have selected these problems from the list used by Bonser in his study of the reasoning ability of children in the 4th, 5th, and 6th school grades. Our tests of 279 at-age children between 12 and 15 years reveal the surprising fact that the test as here used and scored is not passed by much over half of the children of any age in the grades below the high school age. Of the high school pupils, 19% failed to pass, 21% of ordinary successful businessmen, and 27% of Nolan's unemployed men testing up to the average adult level. To find average intelligence cutting such a sorry figure raises the question whether the ancient definition of a man as the rational animal is justified by the facts. The truth is, Average intelligence does not do a great deal of abstract logical reasoning, and the little it does is done usually under the whip of necessity. At first thought, these problems will doubtless appear to the reader to be mere tests of schooling. It is true, of course, that in solving them the subject makes use of knowledge which is ordinarily obtained in school, but this knowledge, that is, knowledge of reading and of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, is possessed by practically all adults who are not feeble-minded, and by many who are. Success, therefore, depends upon the ability to apply this knowledge readily and accurately to the problems given. Precisely the kind of ability in which a deficiency cannot be made good by school training. We can teach even morons how to read problems and how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with a fair degree of accuracy. The trouble comes when they try to decide which of these processes the problems call for. This may require intelligence of high or low order according to the difficulty of the problem. As for the present test, we have shown that almost totally unschooled men of average adult intelligence pass this test as frequently as high school seniors of the same mental level. Test 6. Reversing hands of clock. Procedure. Say to the subject, suppose it is 6:22 o'clock, that is, 22 minutes after 6. Can you see in your mind where the large hand would be and where the small hand would be? Subjects of 12 to 14-year intelligence practically always answer this in the affirmative. Then continue. Now suppose the two hands of the clock were to trade places, so that the large hand takes the place where the small hand was, and the small hand takes the place where the large hand was. What time would it then be? Repeat the test with the hands at 8:10, 10 minutes after 8, and again with the hands at 2:46, 14 minutes before 3. The subject is not allowed to look at the clock or watch, or to aid himself by drawing, but must work out the problem mentally. As a rule, the answer is given within a few seconds or not at all. If an answer is not forthcoming within 2 minutes, the score is failure. Scoring. The test is passed if 2 of the 3 problems are solved within the following ranges of accuracy. The first solution is considered correct if the answer falls between 430 and 435, inclusive. The second if the answer falls between 140 and 145, and the third if the answer falls between 910 and 915. Remarks. It appears that success in the test chiefly depends upon voluntary control over constructive visual imagery. Weakness of visual imagery may account for the failure of a considerable percentage of adults to pass the test. Visual imagery, however, is not absolutely necessary to success. One 8-year-old prodigy who had 12-year intelligence arrived in 40 seconds at a strictly mathematical solution for the second problem, as follows. If it is 2:46 and the hands trade places, then the little hand has gone 1/5 the distance from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. 1/5 of 60 minutes is 12 minutes, and so the time would be 12 minutes after 9 o'clock. Such a solution is certainly possible by the use of verbal imagery of any type. The test shows a high correlation with mental age, but more than most others, it is subject to the influence of cribbing. For this reason, other positions of the clock hands should be tried out for the purpose of finding substitute experiments of equal difficulty. Until such experiments have been made, it will be necessary to confine the experiment to the 3 positions here presented. Schooling seems to have no influence whatever on the percentage of passes. This test was first used by Binet in 1905. But was not included in either the 1908 or 1911 series. Goddard and Coleman both include the test in their revisions, placing it in Year XV. They give only 2 problems, our A and C, and require that both be answered correctly. Neither Goddard nor Coleman, however, indicates the degree of error permitted. Something depends upon original position of the hands. Binet used 6:20 and 2:46. For some reason, the 2:46 arrangement is much more difficult than either 8:10 or 6:22. Yielding almost twice as many failures as either of the other positions. Alternative tests. Repeating 7 digits. This time, as in Year X, only 2 series are given, one of which must be repeated without error. The 2 series are 218-3439 and 972-8475. Note that in none of the tests of repeating digits it is permissible to warn the subject of the number to be given. Remarks. Binet originally placed this test in Year XII, giving 3 trials, but later moved it to Year XV. Goddard and Coleman retained it in Year XII. Our data show that when 3 trials are given, the test is too easy for Year XIV, but that it fits this age when only 2 trials are allowed. that after the age of 12 or 14 years, memory for relatively meaningless material like digits or nonsense syllables improves but little, and that above this level, it does not correlate very closely with intelligence. End of Chapter 18 of The Measurement of Intelligence. Read by Leon Harvey. Chapter 19 of The Measurement of Intelligence by Lewis Terman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Leon Harvey. Chapter 19. Instructions for Average Adult. Average Adult. Test 1. Vocabulary. 65 definitions, 11,700 words. Procedure and scoring. As in previous vocabulary tests, at the average adult level, 65 words should be correctly defined. Test 2. Interpretation of fables, score 8. Procedure. As in Year 12, Test 6, use the same fables. Scoring. The method of scoring is the same as for Year 12, but the total score must be 8 points to satisfy the requirements at this level. Remarks. For discussion of test, see Year 12, Test 5. Test 3. Differences between abstract terms. Procedure. Say, what is the difference between A. Laziness and idleness, B. Evolution and revolution, C. Poverty and misery, D. Character and reputation. Scoring. 3 correct contrasting definitions out of 4 are necessary for a pass. It is not sufficient merely to give a correct meaning for each word of a pair. The subject must point out a difference between the 2 words, so as to make a real contrast. For example, if the subject defines evolution as growth or a gradual change, and revolution as the turning of a wheel on its axis, the experimenter should say, "Yes, but I want you to tell me the difference between evolution and revolution." If the contrast is not then forthcoming, the response is marked minus. The following are sample definitions which may be considered acceptable. A. Laziness and idleness. It is laziness if you won't work, and idleness if you are willing to work but haven't any job. Lots of men are idle who are not lazy and would like to work if they had something to do. Laziness means you don't want to work. Idleness means you are not doing anything just now. Idle people may be lazy, or they may just happen to be out of a job. It is laziness when you don't like to work, and idleness when you are not working. An idle person might be willing to work. A lazy man won't work. Laziness comes from within. Idleness may be forced upon one. Laziness is aversion to activity. Idleness is simply the state of inactivity. Laziness is idleness from choice or preference. Idleness means doing nothing. The essential contrast, accordingly, is that laziness refers to unwillingness to work, idleness to the mere fact of inactivity. This contrast must be expressed, however, clumsily. B. Evolution and revolution. Evolution is a gradual change. Revolution is a sudden change. Evolution is natural development. Revolution is sudden upheaval. Evolution means an unfolding or development. Revolution means a complete upsetting of everything. Evolution is a gradual development of a country or government. Revolution is a quick change of government. Evolution takes place by natural force. A revolution is caused by an outside force. Evolution is growth. Revolution is a quick change from existing conditions. Evolution is a natural change. Revolution is a violent change. Evolution is growth step by step. Evolution is more sudden and radical in its action. Evolution is a change brought about by peaceful development, while revolution is brought about by an uprising. The essential distinction, accordingly, is that evolution means a gradual, natural, or slow change, while revolution means a sudden, forced, or violent change. Non-contrasting definitions, even when the individual terms are defined correctly, are not satisfactory. C. Poverty and misery. Poverty is when you are poor. Misery means suffering. Only the poor are in poverty, but everybody can be miserable. Poverty is a lower stage of poorness. Misery means pain. The poor are not always miserable, and the rich are miserable sometimes. Poverty means to be in want. Misery comes from any kind of suffering or anguish. The poor are in poverty, the sick are in misery. Poverty is the condition of being very poor financially. Misery is a feeling which any class of people can have. One who is poor is in poverty. One who is wretched or doesn't enjoy life is in misery. Poverty comes from lack of money, misery from lack of happiness or comfort. Misery means distress. It can come from poverty or many other things. D. Character and reputation. Character is what you are. Reputation is what people say about you. You have character if you are honest, but you might be honest and still have a bad reputation among people who misjudge you. Character is your real self. Reputation is the opinion people have about you. Your character depends upon yourself. Reputation depends on what others think of you. Character means your real morals. Reputation is the way you are known in the world. A man has a good character if he will not do evil, but a man may have a good reputation and still have a bad character. A little practice and a good deal of discrimination are necessary for the correct grading of responses to this test. Subjects are often so clumsy in expressing that their responses are anything but clear. It is then necessary to ask them to explain what they mean. Further questioning, however, is not permissible. For uniformity in scoring, it is necessary to bear in mind that the definitions given must, in order to be satisfactory, express the essential distinction between the two words. Remarks. What we have said regarding the psychological significance of Test 2, Year XII, applies equally well here. The test on the whole is a valuable one. Our statistics show that it is not, as some critics have thought, mainly a test of schooling. The main criticism to be made is that it imposes a somewhat difficult task upon the power of language expression. For this reason, it is necessary in scoring to disregard clumsiness of expression and to look only to the essential correctness or incorrectness of the thought. This test first appeared in Year XIII of Binet's 1908 scale. The terms used were happiness and honor, evolution and revolution, event and advent, poverty and misery, pride and pretension. In the 1911 revision, happiness and honor and pride and pretension were dropped, and the other three pairs were moved up to the adult group. 2 out of 3 successes being required for a pass. Coleman places it in Year XV, using happiness and honor instead of character and reputation, and requires 3 successes out of 5. Test 4. Problem of the enclosed boxes. Procedure. Show the subject a cardboard box about 1 inch on a side and say, "You see this box? It has 2 smaller boxes inside of it. And each one of the smaller boxes contains a little tiny box. How many boxes are there altogether, counting the big one?" To be sure that the subject understands, repeat the statement of the problem. First a large box, then 2 smaller ones, and each of the smaller ones contains a little tiny box. Record the response, and showing another box say, "This box has 2 smaller boxes inside, and each of the smaller boxes contains 2 tiny boxes. How many altogether?" Remember, first the large box, then 2 smaller ones, and each smaller one contains 2 tiny boxes. The third problem, which is given in the same way, states that there are 3 smaller boxes, each of which contains 3 tiny boxes. In the fourth problem, there are 4 smaller boxes, each containing 4 tiny boxes. The problem must be given orally, and the solution must be found without the aid of pencil or paper. Only 1/2 minute is allowed for each problem. Note that each problem is stated twice. A correction is permitted, providing it is offered spontaneously and is not seen to be the result of guessing. Guessing can be checked up by asking the subject to explain the solution. Scoring. 3 of the 4 problems must be solved correctly within the half minute allotted to each. Remarks. Success depends in the first place upon ability to comprehend the statement of the problem and to hold its conditions in mind. Subjects much below the 12-year level of intelligence are often unable to do this. Granting that the problem has been comprehended, success seems to depend chiefly upon the facility with which the constructive imagination manipulates concrete visual imagery. In this respect, it resembles the problem of reversing the hands of a clock. With some subjects, however, verbal imagery alone is operative. Tactile imagery would, of course, serve the purpose as well. This is as good a place as any to emphasize the fact that the introspective study of mental imagery has little to contribute to the measurement of intelligence. Intelligence tests are concerned with the total result of a thought process, rather than with the imagery supports of that process. Thought may be carried on almost equally well by various kinds of imagery. As Galton showed, a person can be taught to carry on arithmetical processes by the use of smell imagery. The kind of imagery employed in this product of slight, innate preferences complicated by the more or less accidental effects of habit. We may say that imagery is to thinking what a scaffolding is to architecture. The important thing is the completed building rather than the nature of the scaffolding employed in erecting it. No one thinks of blaming the ill construction of a building upon the kind of scaffolding used. For if the architect and builder are competent, satisfactory scaffolding will be found. Just as little are deficiencies or peculiarities of imagery the real cause of low-order intelligence. We cannot increase intelligence by formal drill in the use of supposedly important kinds of mental imagery, any more than we can transform a plain carpenter into a Michelangelo by instructing him in the use of scaffolding materials such as were employed in the construction of St. Peter's Cathedral.
This test is of our own invention and has been brought to its present form only after a good deal of preliminary experimentation. It correlates fairly well with mental age as determined by the scale as a whole. It was passed by 55% of high school pupils and by 65% of unschooled businessmen. Success in it thus seems not to depend upon schooling.
Test 5. Repeating 6 digits reversed. The series used are 4, 7, 1, 9, 5, 2, 5, 8, 3, 2, 9, 4, and 7, 5, 2, 6, 3, 8. Procedure and scoring.
As in Year XII, Alternative 2.
Remarks. The test is passed by approximately half of average adults and by 3/4 of superior adults. It shows no effect of schooling, the uneducated businessmen even surpassing our high school students. For the higher levels of intelligence, especially, the test is superior to that of repeating digits in the direct order. It is less mechanical and makes heavier demands upon higher intelligence. Test 6. Using a code. Procedure. Show the subject the code given on the accompanying form. Say, see these diagrams here? Look and you will see that they contain all the letters of the alphabet. Now examine the arrangement of the letters. They go, pointing, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. You see the letters in the first 2 diagrams are arranged in the up and down order, pointing again, and the letters in the other 2 diagrams run in just the opposite way from the hands of a clock, pointing. Look again, and you will see that the second diagram is drawn just like the first, except that each letter has a dot with it, and that the last diagram is like the third except that here, also, each letter has a dot. Now all of this represents a code, that is, a secret language. It is a real code, one that was used in the Civil War for sending secret messages. This is the way it works. We draw the lines which hold a letter, but leave out the letter. Here, for example, is the way we would write spy. Then write the word spy, pointing out carefully where each letter comes from and emphasizing the fact that the dot must be used in addition to the lines in writing any letter in the second or fourth diagram. Illustrate also with war. Then add, I'm going to have you write something for me. Remember now how the letters go. First, pointing as before,
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, then J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, then S, T, U, V, then W, X, Y, Z. And don't forget the dots for the letters in this diagram and this one, pointing.
At this point, take away the diagrams and tell the subject to write the words, come quickly. Say nothing about hurrying. The subject is given a pencil, but is allowed to draw only the symbols for the words, come quickly. He is not permitted to reproduce the entire code and then to copy the code letters from his reproduction. Scoring. The test is passed if the words are written in 6 minutes and without more than 2 errors. Omissions of a dot counts as only a half error. Remarks. It is not easy to analyze the mental functions which contribute to success in the code test. Contrary to what be supposed, success does not necessarily depend upon getting and retaining a visual picture of the diagrams. Kinesthetic imagery will answer the purpose just as well, or the original visual impression may even be translated at once into auditory verbal imagery and remembered as such. The significance of the test must be expressed in other terms than the kind of imagery it may happen to bring into play. Healy and Fernald describe the task of writing a code sentence without copy as one which requires close attention and steadiness of purpose. They also emphasize the fact that the intention must be directed inward, since there is no object of interest before the senses, and since no special stimulus to attention is offered by the experimenter. Observations we have made on subjects during the test confirm this view as to the factors involved. That inability to remember the code as a whole is not a common cause of failure is shown by the fact that subjects above 12-year intelligence who have failed on the test are nearly always able to reproduce the diagrams and insert the letters in their proper places. To give the code form of a given letter without copy, however, makes a much heavier demand on attention. Nearly all subjects find it necessary to trace the code form in imagination from the beginning up to each letter whose code form is sought. Subjects of superior intelligence, however, sometimes hit upon the device of remembering the position of individual key letters, e.g., the first letter of each figure, from which, as a base, any desired letter form may quickly sort out. The test correlates well with mental age, but for some reason not apparent it is passed by a larger percentage of high school pupils than unschooled adults of the same mental level. The code test was first described by Healy and Fernald in their Test for Practical Mental Classification. The authors gave no data, however, which would indicate the mental level to which the test belongs. Dr. Goddard incorporated it in Year 15 of his revision of the Binet scale, but also fails to give statistics. The location given the test in the Stanford revision is based on tests of nearly 500 individuals, ranging from a mental level of 12 years to that of superior adult. It appears that the test is considerably more difficult than most had thought it to be. Alternative Test 1. Repeating 28 syllables. The sentences for this test are: A. Walter likes very much to go on visits to his grandmother because she always tells him many funny stories. B. Yesterday I saw a pretty little dog in the street. It had curly brown hair, short legs, and a long tail. Procedure. Exactly as in Year 6 Test 6. Emphasize that the sentence must be repeated without a single change of any sort. Get attention before giving each sentence. Scoring. Passed if one sentence is repeated without a single error. In Year 6 and Year 10, we score the response as satisfactory if one sentence was repeated without error, or if two were repeated with not more than one error each. Remarks. The test of repeating sentences is not as satisfactory in the higher intelligence levels as in the lower. It is too mechanical to tax very heavily the higher thought processes. It does, however, have a certain correlation with intelligence. Contrary to what one might have expected, uneducated adults of average adult intelligence surpass our high school students of the same mental level. Binet located this test in Year 12 of the 1908 series, but shifted it to Year 15 in 1911. The American versions of the Binet scale have usually retained it in Year 12, though Goddard admits that the sentences are somewhat too difficult for that year. Kuhlman puts the test in Year 12, but reduces the sentences to 24 syllables and permits one rereading. We give only 2 trials, and our sentences are considerably more difficult. With the procedure and scoring we have used, the test is rather easy for the average adult group, but a little too hard for Year 14. Alternative Test 2. Comprehension of physical relations. A. Problem regarding the path of a cannonball. Procedure. Draw on a piece of paper a horizontal line 6 or 8 inches long. Above it, an inch or two, draw a short horizontal line about an inch long and parallel to the first. Tell the subject that the long line represents the perfectly level ground of a field and that the short line represents a cannon. Explain that the cannon is pointed horizontally, on a level, and is fired across this perfectly level field. After it is clear that these conditions of the problem are comprehended, we add, now suppose that this cannon is fired off and that the ball comes to the ground at this point here, pointing to the farther end of the line, which represents the field. Take this pencil and draw a line which will show what path the cannonball will take from the time it leaves the mouth of the cannon till it strikes the ground. Scoring. There are 4 types of responses. 1. A straight diagonal line is drawn from the cannon's mouth to the point where the ball strikes. 2. A straight line is drawn from the cannon's mouth running horizontally until almost directly over the goal, at which point the line drops almost or quite vertically. 3. The path from the cannon's mouth first rises considerably from the horizontal, at an angle perhaps of between 10 to 45 degrees, and finally describes a gradual curve downwards to the goal. 4. The line begins almost on a level and drops more rapidly towards the end of its course. Only the last is satisfactory. Of course, nothing like a mathematically accurate solution of the problem is expected. It is sufficient if the response belongs to the 4th type above, instead of being absurd, as the other types described are. Anyone who has ever thrown stones should have the data for such an approximate solution. Not a day of schooling is necessary. B. Problem as to the weight of a fish in water. Procedure. Say to the subject, "You know, of course, that water holds up a fish that is placed in it. Well, here is a problem. Suppose we have a bucket which is partially full of water. We place the bucket on the scales and find that with the water in it, it weighs exactly 45 pounds. Then we put a 5-pound fish into the bucket of water. Now what will the whole thing weigh?" Scoring. Many subjects, even as low as 9 or 10 year intelligence, will answer promptly, "Why, 45 pounds and 5 pounds makes 50 pounds, of course." But this is not sufficient. We proceed to ask, with serious demeanor, how this can be corrected since the water itself holds up the fish. If the young subject who has answered so glibly now laughs sheepishly and apologizes for his error, saying that he answered without thinking, etc., this response is scored failure without further questioning. Other subjects, mostly above the 14-year level, adhere to the answer 50 pounds. However strongly we urge the argument that the water holding up the fish. In response to our question, how can that be the case, it is sufficient if the subject replies that the weight is there just the same. The scales have to hold up the bucket and the bucket has to hold up the water, or words to that effect. Only some such response as this is satisfactory. If the subject keeps changing his answer or says that he thinks the weight would be 50 pounds but is not certain, the score is failure. C. Difficulty of hitting a distant mark. Procedure. Say to the subject, "You know, you do not know what it means when they say a gun carries 100 yards. It means that the bullet goes that far before it drops to amount to anything." All boys and most girls more than a dozen years old understand this readily. If the subject does not understand, we explain again what is meant for a gun to carry a given distance. When this part is clear, we proceed as follows. Now suppose a man is shooting at a mark about the size of a quart can. His rifle carries perfectly more than 100 yards. With such a gun, is it any harder to hit the mark at 100 yards than it is at 50 yards? After the response is given, we ask the subject to explain. Scoring. Simply to say that it would be easier at 50 yards is not sufficient, nor can we pass a response which merely states that it is easier to aim at 50 yards. The correct principle must be given, one which shows the subject has appreciated the fact that a small deviation from the bull's eye at 50 yards due to incorrect aim becomes a larger deviation at 100 yards. However, the subject is not required to know that the deviation at 100 yards is exactly twice as great as at 50 yards. A certain amount of questioning is often necessary before we can decide whether the subject has the correct principle in mind. Scoring the entire test. 2 of the 3 problems must be solved in such a way as to satisfy the requirements above set forth. Remarks. These problems were devised by the writer. They yield interesting results when properly given, but are not without their faults. Sometimes a very superior subject fails, while occasionally an inferior subject unexpectedly succeeds. On the whole, however, the test correlates fairly well with mental age. At the 14-year level, less than 50% pass of average adults, from 60 to 75% are successful. Few superior adults fail. The test as here given is little influenced by the formal instruction given in the grades or the high school. In fact, 80% of our uneducated businessmen as contrasted with 65% of high school juniors and seniors pass the test. Success probably depends in the main upon previous interest in physical relationships and upon the ability to understand phenomena of this kind which the subject has had opportunity to observe. It would be interesting to standardize a longer series of problems designed to test a subject's comprehension of common physical relationships. In the first few months of life, a normal child learns that objects unsupported fall to the ground. Later he learns that fire burns, that birds fly in the air, that fish do not sink in the water, that water does not run uphill, that it is easy to lift a leg or arm as one lies prone in the water, that wind is thrown from a rotating wheel, but always in the same direction, that a stone which is flying through the air swiftly is more dangerous than one which is moving slowly, that it is more dangerous to be run over by a train than by a buggy, that it is hard to run against a strong wind, that cyclones blow down trees and houses, that a rapidly moving train creates a stronger wind than a slower train, that a feather falls through the air with less speed than a stone, that a falling object gains momentum, that a heavy moving object is harder to stop than a light object moving at the same rate, that freezing water bursts pipes, that sounds sometimes give echoes, that rainbows cannot be approached, that a lamp seems dim by daylight, that by day the stars are not visible, and the moon is only barely visible, that the headlights of an approaching automobile or train are blinding, that if the room in which we are reading is badly lighted, we must hold the book nearer to the eyes, that running makes the heart beat faster and increases the rate of breathing, that if we are cold, we can get warm by running, that whirling rapidly makes us dizzy, that heat or exercise will cause perspiration, etc. Although the causes of some of these phenomena are not understood even by intelligent adults, without some instruction, the facts themselves are learned by the normal individual from his own experience. The higher the mental level and the greater the curiosity, the more observant one is about such matters, and the more one learns. Many items of knowledge, such as we have mentioned, could and should be standardized for various mental levels. In devising tests of this kind, we should of course have to look out for the influences of formal instruction. End of Chapter 19 of The Measurement of Intelligence. Read by Leon Harvey. Chapter 20 of The Measurement of Intelligence by Lewis Terman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Leon Harvey. Chapter 20. Instructions for Superior Adult. Test 1. Vocabulary. 75 definitions, 13,500 words. Procedure and scoring. As in previous vocabulary tests, at the Superior Adult level, 75 words should be known. The test is passed by only 1/3 of those at the average adult level, but by about 90% of the superior adults. Ability to pass the test is relatively dependent of the number of years the subject has attended school. Our businessmen showing even higher percentage of passes than high school pupils. Test 2. Binet's paper cutting test. Procedure. Take a piece of paper about 6 inches square and say, "Watch carefully what I do. See, if I fold the paper this way," folding it once over the middle, "then I fold it this way," folding it again in the middle, but at right angles to the first fold. "Now I will cut out a notch right here," indicating. At this point, take scissors and cut out a small notch from the middle of the side which presents but one edge. Throw the fragment which has been cut out into the waste paper basket or under the table. Leave the folded paper exposed to view, but press flat against the table. Then give the subject a pencil and a second sheet of paper, like the one already used, and say, "Take this piece of paper and make a drawing to show how the other sheet of paper would look if it were unfolded. Draw lines to show the creases in the paper and show what results from the cutting." The subject is not permitted to fold the second sheet, but must solve the problems by imagination unaided. Note that we do not say, "Draw the holes," and this would inform the subject that more than one hole is expected. Scoring. The test is passed if the creases in the paper are properly represented, if the holes are drawn in the correct number, and if they are located correctly, that is, both on the same crease and each about halfway between the center of the paper and the side. the shape of the holes is disregarded. Failure may be due to error as regards the creases or the number and location of the holes, or it may involve any combination of the above errors. Remarks. Success seems to depend upon constructive visual imagination. The subject must first be able to construct in imagination the creases which result from the folding, and secondly, to picture the effects of the cutting as regards number of holes and their location. It appears that a solution is seldom arrived at, even in the case of college students, by logical mathematical thinking. Our unschooled subjects even succeeded somewhat better than high school and college students of the same mental level. Binet placed this test in Year XIII of the 1908 scale, but shifted it to the adult group in the 1911 revision. Goddard retains it in the adult group, while Coleman places it in Year XV. There have also been certain variations in the procedure employed. As given in the Stanford revision, the test is passed by hardly any subjects below the 14-year level, by about one-third of average adults, and by the large majority of superior adults. Test 3. Repeating 8 digits. Procedure and scoring. The same as in previous tests, with digits reversed. The series used are 7, 2, 5, 3, 4, 8, 9, 6, 4, 9, 8, 5, 3, 7, 6, 2, and 8, 3, 7, 9, 5, 4, 8, 2. Guard against rhythm and grouping and reading the digits, and do not give warning as to the number to be given. The test is passed by about one-third of average adults, and by over two-thirds of superior adults. The test shows no marked difference between educated and uneducated subjects of the same mental level. Test 4. Repeating thought of passage. Procedure. Say, I'm going to read a little section of about 6 or 8 lines. When I am through, I will ask you to repeat as much of it as you can. It doesn't make any difference whether you remember the exact words or not, but you must listen carefully so that you can tell me everything it says. Then read the following sections, pausing after each for the subject's report, which should be recorded verbatim. A. Tests such as we are now making are of value both to the advancement of science and for the information of the person who is tested. It is important for science to learn how people differ and on what factors these differences depend. If we can separate the influence of heredity from the influence of environment, we may be able to apply our knowledge so as to guide human development. We may thus in some cases correct defects and develop abilities which we might otherwise neglect. B. Many opinions have been given on the value of life. Some call it good, others call it bad. It would be nearer correct to say that it is mediocre. Or, on the other hand, our happiness is never as great as we should like. And on the other hand, our misfortunes are never as great as our enemies would wish for us. It is this mediocrity of life which prevents it from being radically unjust. Sometimes the subject hesitates to begin, thinking in spite of our wording of the instructions, that a perfect reproduction is expected. Others fall into the opposite misunderstanding and think that they are prohibited from using the words of the text and must give the thought entirely in their own language. In cases of hesitation, we should urge the subject a little and remind him that he is to express the thought of the selection in whatever he prefers, that the main thing is to tell what the selection says. Scoring. The test is passed if the subject is able to repeat in reasonably consecutive order the main thoughts of at least one of the selections. Neither elegance of expression nor verbatim repetition is expected. We merely want to know whether the leading thoughts in the selection have been grasped and remembered. All grades of accuracy are found, both in the comprehension of the selection and in the recall, and it is not always easy to draw the line between satisfactory and unsatisfactory responses. The following sample performances will serve as a guide. Selection A. Satisfactory. The tests which we are making are given for the advancement of science and for the information of the person tested. By scientific means, we will be able to separate characteristics derived from heredity and environment and to treat each class separately. By doing so, we can more accurately correct defects. Tests like these are for two purposes. First, to develop a science, and second, to apply it to the person to help him. The tests are to find out how you differ from another and to measure the differences between your heredity and environment. These tests are given to see if we can separate heredity and environment and to see if we can find out how one person differs from another. We can then correct these differences and teach people more effectively. The tests that we are now making are valuable along both scientific and personal lines. By using them, it can be found out where a person is weak and where he is strong. We can then strengthen his weak points and remedy some things that would otherwise be neglected. They are of great benefit to science and to the person concerned. Tests such as we are now making are of great importance because they aim to show in what respect we differ from others and why, if they do this, they will be able to guide us in the right channel and bring success instead of failure. Unsatisfactory. Tests such as we are now making are of value both for the advancement of science and for the information of the person interested. It is necessary to know this. Such tests as we are now making show about the human mind and show in what channels we are fitted. It is the testing of each individual between his effects of heredity and environment. It is interesting for us to study science for two reasons. First, to test our mental ability, and second, for the further development of science. Tests such as we are now making help in two ways. It helps the scientist and it gives information to the people. Tests are being given to pupils today to better them and to aid science for generations to come. If each person knows exactly his own beliefs and ideas and faults, he can find out exactly what kind of work he is fitted for by heredity. The tests show that environment doesn't count, for if you're all right, you will get along anyway. Note invention. Selection B. Satisfactory. There are different opinions about life. Some call it good and some bad. It would be more correct to say that it is middling, because we are never as happy as we would like to be, and we are never as sad as our enemies want us to be. One hears many judgments about life. Some say it is good, while others say it is bad. But it is really neither of the extremes. Life is mediocre. We do not have as much good as we desire, nor do we have as much misfortune as others want us to have. Nevertheless, we have enough good to keep life from being unjust. Some people have different views of life from others. Some say it is bad, others say it is good. It is better to class life as mediocre, as it is never as good as we wish it, and on the other hand, it might be worse. Some people think differently of life. Some think it good, some bad, others mediocre. Which is nearest correct? It brings unhappiness to us, but not as much as our enemies want us to have. Unsatisfactory. Some say life is good. Some say it is mediocre. Even though some say it is mediocre, they say it is right. There are two sides of life. Some say it is good while others say it is bad. To some, life is happy, and they get all they can out of life. For others, life is not happy, and therefore they fail to get all there is in life. One hears many different judgments of life. Some call it good, some call it bad. It brings unhappiness and does not have enough pleasure. It should be better distributed. There are different opinions of the value of life. Some say it is good and some say it is bad. Some say it is mediocrity. Some think it brings happiness while others do not. Nowadays, there is much said about the value of life. Some say it is good while others say it is bad. A person should not have an ill feeling towards the value of life, and he should not be unjust to anyone. Honesty is the best policy. People who are unjust are more likely to be injured by their enemies. Note invention. Remarks. Contrary to what the subject is led to expect, the test is less a test of memory than of ability to comprehend the drift of an abstract passage. A subject who fully grasps the meaning of the selection as it is read is not likely to fail because of poor memory. Mere verbal memory improves but little after the age of 14 or 15 years, as is shown by the fact that our adults do little better than 8th grade children in repeating sentences of 28 syllables. On the other hand, adult intelligence is vastly superior in the comprehension and retention of a logically presented group of abstract ideas. There is nothing in which stupid persons cut a poorer figure than in grappling with the abstract. Their thinking clings tenaciously to the concrete. Their concepts are vague or inaccurate. The interrelations among their concepts are scanty in the extreme, and such poor mental stores as they have are little available for ready use. A few critics have objected to the use of tests demanding abstract thinking, on the ground that abstract thought is a very special aspect of intelligence, and that facility in it depends almost entirely on occupational habits and the accidents of education. Some have even gone so far as to say that we are not justified on the basis of any number of such tests in pronouncing a subject backward or defective. It is supposed that a subject who has no capacity in the use of abstract ideas may nevertheless have excellent intelligence along other lines. In such cases, it is said, we should not penalize the subject for his failure in handling abstractions, but substitute instead tests requiring motor coordination and the manipulation of things, tests in which the supposedly dull child often succeeds fairly well. From the psychological point of view, such a proposal is naively unpsychological. It is in the very essence of the higher thought processes to be conceptual and abstract. What the above proposal amounts to is that, if the subject is not capable of the more complex and strictly human type of thinking, we should ignore this fact and estimate his intelligence entirely on the ability he displays to carry on mental operations of a more simple and primitive kind. This would be like asking the physician to ignore the diseased parts of the patient's body and to base his diagnosis on an examination of the organs which are sound.
The present test throws light in an interesting way on the integrity of the critical faculty.
Some subjects are unwilling to extend the report in the least beyond what they know to be approximately correct, while others, with defective powers of autocriticism, manufacture a report which draws heavily on the imagination, perhaps continuing in garrulous fashion as long as they can think of anything having the remotest connection with any thought in the selection. We have included, for each selection, one illustration of this type in the simple failures given above. The worst fault of the test is its susceptibility to the influence of schooling. Our uneducated adults of even superior adult intelligence often fail, while about 2/3 of high school pupils succeed. The unschooled adults have a marked tendency either to give a summary which is inadequate because of its extreme brevity, or else to give a criticism of the thought which the passage contains. This test first appeared in Binet's 1911 revision, in the adult group. Binet used only selection B, and in a slightly more difficult form than we have given above. Goddard gives the test like Binet, and retains it in the adult group. Coleman locates it in Year XV, using only selection A.
On the basis of over 300 tests of adults, we find the test too difficult for the average adult level, even on the basis of only one success in 2 trials, and when scored on the rather liberal standard above set forth.
Test 5. Repeating 7 digits reversed. Procedure and scoring. The same as in previous tests of this kind. The series are 4162593, 382, 6475, and 9452837. We have collected fewer data on this test than any other of the others, as it was added later to the test series. As far as we have used it, we have found few average adults who pass, while about half of the superior adults do so. Test 6. Ingenuity test. Procedure. Problem A is stated as follows. A mother sent her boy to the river and told him to bring back exactly 7 pints of water. She gave him a 3-pint vessel and a 5-pint vessel. Show me how the boy can measure out exactly 7 pints of water using nothing but these 2 vessels and not guessing at the amount. You should begin by filling the 5-pint vessel first. Remember, you have a 3-pint vessel and a 5-pint vessel, and you must bring back exactly 7 pints. The problem is given orally, but may be repeated if necessary. The subject is not allowed pencil or paper and is requested to give his solution orally as he works it out. It is then possible to make a complete record of the method employed. The subject is likely to resort to some such method as to fill the 3-pint vessel 2/3 full, or I would mark the inside of the 5-pint vessel so as to show where 4 pints come to, etc. We inform the subject that such a method is not allowable, that this would be guessing, since he could not be sure whether the 3-pint vessel was 2/3 full or whether he had marked off his 5-pint vessel accurately. Tell him he must measure out the water without any guesswork. Explain also that it is a fair problem, not a catch. Say nothing about pouring from one vessel to another, but if the subject asks whether this is permissible, the answer is yes. The time limit for each problem is 5 minutes. If the subject fails on the first problem, we explain the solution in full and then proceed to the next. The second problem is like the first, except that a 5-pint vessel and a 7-pint vessel are given. To get 8 pints, the subject being told to begin by filling the 5-pint vessel. In the third problem, 4 and 9 are given. To get 7, the instruction begin by filling the 4-pint vessel. Note that in each problem we instruct the subject how to begin. This is necessary in order to secure uniformity of conditions. It is possible to solve all the problems by beginning with either of the two vessels, but the solution is made very much more difficult if we begin in the direction opposite from that recommended. Give no further aid. It is necessary to refrain from comment of every kind. Scoring. 2 of 3 problems must be solved correctly within the 5 minutes allotted to each. Remarks. We have called this a test of ingenuity. The subject who is given the problem finds himself involved in a difficulty from which he must extricate himself. Means must be found to overcome an obstacle. This requires practical judgment and a certain amount of inventive ingenuity. Various possibilities must be explored and either accepted for trial or rejected. If the amount of invention called for seems to the reader inconsiderable, let it be remembered that the important inventions of history have not as a rule had a Minerva birth, but instead have developed by successive stages, each involving but a small step in advance. It is unnecessary to emphasize at length the function of invention in the higher thought processes. In one form or another, it is present in all intellectual activity, in the creation and use of language, in art, in social adjustments, in religion, and in philosophy, as truly as in the domains of science and practical affairs. Certainly, this is true if we accept Mason's broad definition of an invention as including every change in human activity made designedly and systematically. From the psychological point of view, perhaps, Mason is justified in looking upon the great inventor as an epitome of the genius of the world. To develop a Krag Jorgensen from a bow and arrow, a velvet-tipped lucifer match from the primitive fire stick, or a modern piano from the first crude stringed musical instrument, has involved much the same intellectual processes as have been operative in transforming fetishism and magic into religion and philosophy, or scattered fragments of knowledge into science. Psychologically, invention depends upon the constructive imagination, that is, upon the ability to abstract from what is immediately present to the senses and to picture new situations with their possibilities and consequences. Images are united in order to form new combinations. As we have several times emphasized, the decisive intellectual differences among human beings are not greatly dependent upon mere sense discrimination or native retentiveness. Far more important than the raw mass of sense data is the correct shooting together of the sense elements in memory and imagination. This is but another name for invention. It is a synthetic or apperceptive activity of the mind that gives the 7-league boots to genius. It is, however, a kind of ability which is possessed by all minds to a greater or less degree. Any test has its value which gives a clue, as this test does to the subject's ability in this direction. The test was devised by the writer and used in 1905 in a study of the intellectual processes of bright and dull boys, but it was not at the time standardized. It has been found to belong at a much higher mental level than was at first supposed. Only an insignificant number pass the test below the mental age of 14 years, and about 2/3 of average adults fail. Of our superior adults, somewhat more than 75% succeed. Formal education influences the test little or not at all, the unschooled businessmen making a somewhat better showing than the high school students. End of Chapter 20 of The Measurement of Intelligence, and the end of The Measurement of Intelligence by Lewis Terman. Read by Leon Harvey.